O'Reilly. Are your wiper blades chattering, skipping, or squeaking? Don't let streaks or smearing on your windshield compromise your visibility. When it's time to replace your wiper blades, stop by O'Reilly Auto Parts and see our selection. Our professional parts people will even install your new wiper blades while you wait. Stop by O'Reilly Auto Parts today. O'Reilly Auto Parts.
There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today. You ever get that feeling the walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating you? You crave some wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe in a spot all your own. Well, head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, streams, you name it. Search by acreage. You can search by location. You can search by the kind of hunting and fishing you're dreaming of. Land.com. It is where the adventure begins.
I guess I grew up on an older road.
Hey, everybody! Welcome to another edition of the Hunting Collective. Hello, Philip.
Hi, Ben.
I was just telling you, boy, I feel like shit.
Mm-hmm.
Big time.
And knowing you, the first thing I assumed was, well, alcohol was involved.
And you were like, oh, did you get drunk last night? I'm like, not really.
But kind of.
It was an accident. I was working in the yard all weekend. I was working hard and, doing landscaping, building things. And it was hot. And then, last night as it got cooled down, I think I'll have a couple of beers. I'll go in the fridge, I get a couple of beers. And I'm drinking the beers while I'm working. I'm thirsty. It's just been a long day. And next thing I know, I had 8 beers.
It's one of those things when you're working outside in the heat and you're drinking. Sometimes you don't realize how much you're drinking until you step inside your house and take your sunglasses off and just stand there for a second. And then it all just
covered
pours
in
over
dirt.
you.
Yeah, covered in dirt. I just shook my head and I was like, well, all right, I'm drunk.
Yep.
Perfect. I'm gonna go take a nap for about 10 hours. So anyway, I'm not at my best today. So I apologize to everyone out there in THC land. Please.
This is a free show.
Free show.
They can't complain.
You can't complain. Give us a 5-star review on iTunes. Write something really nice about this particular podcast. But we got really important things to do, so I'm going to try to perk up. Maybe I'll have my first sip of coffee later today or something like that. Make me feel a little better, Phil.
I wish you would start drinking coffee. I think that would be like an event, a world-changing event.
I'm going to call the guys at Black Rifle Coffee and be like, can we do a live event? Sure. Where I just sit on the stage with a spotlight, and I'm just slowly bring the cup of coffee to my mouth, slowly sip it, and then end scene. That's it. It's performance art.
Yeah, you could have done it on some public land and entered it into this contest.
Oh yeah, yeah. The Great American Outdoors Contest is over. It's over. This one. Let's see. Of all the contests we've done, this is what? If we're going to count them all out, this is the 5th contest we've done. We're going to keep doing them, by the way. So keep listening. Please, tell your friends. This one was not the most impressive via numbers, but the most impressive via the effort, which is saying a lot because motherfuckers have made hand turkeys out of fly tying materials and put them in wooden cases. Did you ever see that, by the way?
I did, yeah. In defense of your listeners, this was the most, I think you were asking the most of them for this contest.
The next time I'm just going to be like, take a picture of yourself. we need to, when I was drunk last night, I had an idea for a contest and I forgot it. I can't remember it now.
Oh, that's too bad.
So I'll remember.
What could have been?
It was really a good idea. We had this contest where you had to go. It was a lot. You had to find a place that was receiving or received funds from the WCF, the Land and Water Conservation Fund, and then you had to go to it.
So that's two steps already, and that's not even the difficult part.
People are busy.
That's right.
And then you had to make art when you got there.
Yep.
It could have been, most of you chose film. We received dozens of films, and I've picked the top 3 are films that I've chosen. Some poetry, and then other people just send in photos of them doing stuff. I will tell a lot of you people, this ain't going to work on me. It might work on you, Phil. It ain't going to work on me with pictures of your kids, okay? Even if they're cute. There were some cute ones. But it's just not going to work on me, so don't pander to me with cute children on public lands. That's not the point.
It's disgusting.
They are the future. It's bullshit.
They are the future, and you are introducing them to the wonderful splendor of the American outdoors, but Ben's not impressed.
I'm not impressed.
No.
I mean, it really is the embodiment of what we're all about here at THC. But I don't want to see it.
Nope.
I don't want you to shove it in my face. I don't need to see it.
No.
So rather than vote on these things, I just felt like there were 3 that were so exceptional, and they were so long, so we can't play. Each of them is like 4 to 5 minutes, so we can't play them all here for you. But I'm going to try to select clips that embodies the video themselves and the person who turned that video into us. But before we get to that, a couple updates on the Great American Outdoors Act itself. This past Friday, the House Rules Committee debated the act, the piece of legislation, before being considered on the floor tomorrow. So if today's Tuesday, you're listening to this, I hope you don't listen to this any other day than when it comes out. So hopefully this is Tuesday. So tomorrow is Wednesday. Then it's going to get votes tomorrow, starting between 3 and 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. But during the meeting last Friday, the leadership denied all amendments and kept the bill clean, which is important, Phil. Do you know why?
Why is that?
Because then they can vote on it. Because if it had to have amendments, it could get pushed back to the Senate, and we could be completely screwed. Because we don't want this thing to go to November, because then the world will change in a way that we do not know.
That's true.
Okay. All the words, I just want to check because I'm extremely hungover and tired.
You're making sense.
Are the words making sense?
You're fine. You're doing great.
All right. We're also, just by the by, we're back quarantined again, kind of.
A little bit, yeah.
We're not allowed in the office, which is, more cases of COVID, more worries. Got to keep Steve Rennell healthy. Can't have him sick. Or you guys will have a Netflix show. And so we're back, but Phil and I are allowed to come in the studio and social distance.
That's right.
And Phil tells me I shouldn't tell all you guys this stuff. He says they don't care. He says that all the time, but particularly about this. They don't care about our office situation.
Yep. I still stand by
that. So people have completely tuned this out. But anyway, back to the very important, life-changing, once-in-a-lifetime legislation, the Great American Outdoors Act. So just to review, the Great American Outdoors Act would fully dedicate $900 million to the Land and Water Conservation Fund every year in perpetuity. And then it would address the $20 billion in maintenance backlogs on public lands and waters. We'll be fixing shit out there, okay? Fixing it up for you. And so, if you're listening to this on Tuesday, you need to go and call the Capitol switchboard, 202-224-3121. Or you can use the legislator directory at bha.com. Go there and find it. Find your representative's direct number, or, like I said, call that switchboard number, 202-224-3121, and tell them to pass the Great American Outdoors Act. Tell them why you care. Have you done that yet, Phil?
I have, yeah.
Yeah. Have you?
I have.
Oh, you told me you did. Yeah, I thought you were lying.
No. I mean, I did it once a while ago, back before things were like as far along as they were now.
It's looking good, Phil. I don't want to be one of those guys who gets in a situation where I'm too confident. I'm usually never too confident. I'm just the right amount of confident. But at this moment, I'm very, very confident that by the time we talk to you again next week, that we will have a bill headed to Mr. Trump's desk for signature. And that's exciting for all of us. So without further ado, we're going to announce the winners. Thank you so much to First Light. Thank you to Nemo. And there's another one, Vortex. We love you all equally. My synapses not firing.
That's fine. I'm proud of you for just being here.
So you got to soldier through sometimes.
Showing up.
Podcasting, some people say podcasting is not a hard job. check me out right now.
You know, I want for all of you listeners who have real jobs, who if you showed up to work drunk or hungover, you would be terminated or face repercussions. Just
No, I got a collared shirt on.
You do, yeah, sure.
Yeah,
I never wear a collared shirt.
yeah. I couldn't find any like shoes, so I just my like dirty flip flops.
That's fine.
But from the waist up, I look professional.
You're doing great.
Thanks. A lot of people. Thank you again to everybody that sent things in. We appreciate you as always. It's one of the things that makes this show the most fun. It really makes it worth getting up in the morning and scratching all the dirt out of your eyes and barely being able to see for about an hour, and then getting yourself into the office. So what are we going to do here, Phil? We're going to start with the Vortex Binos.
Okay.
Now,
this is third place.
Okay. Well, these are listeners that you guys you're all going to know. But Mike Peterson, I'm going to show you this. You've not seen this before, Phil. I'm going to show you this. You make sure that...
I mean, is this going to be... Are people who cannot see the video, are they still going to enjoy this?
No.
Okay, it might be worth uploading some of this to like your Instagram.
Oh, it's going to be on Instagram.
Okay, good. Check it out on Instagram.
But you're not going to have fun at this point. It says Wednesday, 9 a.m.
Sure.
Token Creek. That's where Mike Peterson is.
Okay. Ooh.
Disclaimer, nothing but feelings were hurt in the making of this movie.
I'm worried.
There's Mike. He's outside. He's dressed. He has American flag tank top on.
What a beautiful day to be out at the park. Do some fishing.
Yep.
Maybe get something for the frying pan. Couldn't ask for anything better.
Yeah. What's he? He's popping open a White Claw. What flavor?
Lemon.
Is it lemon?
I think so.
I think it was a mango.
Damn. Mango's good.
Oh, it is mango.
Yeah.
Okay.
That'd be a pretty good idea for a dog's name.
He's not wrong.
Shout out to Mike.
What in the hell is that? Dude, didn't even bring a fishing pole? How the hell's he supposed to catch any dinner? Fucking damn sure ain't gonna catch it without a pole.
Oh, he cursed.
Is this some bitch drinking coffee? Starbucks coffee?
We're gonna fast forward to where he now is
maybe
dressed
I've seen
like
L'Oreal today.
he's not dressed like a hipster.
Okay.
Saw an Oriole today.
Oh.
Still a little hot.
He's drinking his coffee.
Oh my god. Is that guy fishing? He's just gonna come out here, torture fish, poke holes in their mouth. Oh, and that shirt, he totally voted for Trump. God, well, I mean, at least Trump says he's gonna sign the Great American Outdoors Act.
Oh.
I can't believe I found something I like about the guy. At least he's having fun.
Starring Mike Peterson.
Oh man.
This
And Mike Peterson. Okay, that was great.
Good job, Mike Peterson.
That was fantastic.
Round of applause. Phil's not clapping. He's
I'm
clapping. There's
That was
only
good.
two of us. It's not going to sound good.
Yeah.
So Mike Peterson's like his piece of art was trying to tell us that we're bringing people together. So congratulations, Mike Peterson. You're going to get a pair of Vortex Binos. Send them right to your damn house. You can use them to do whatever you do. Who knows what you do. But thanks for listening as always. We appreciate you, buddy. I feel like, again, I don't know if Mike's ever won anything, but he always tries. And in this case, he made it. He made a good joke. He made a good funny. Mm-hmm. Now, this one is going to be hard. If you'll remember Greg Morse from his win, he was the guy that sent us the video of him in his house in his robe. And he had the picture of frame picture of Squeakers.
Yep.
Remember him? Rest
Yep,
in peace,
yep.
Squeakers. This is the same guy, so he's a second-time winner. He knows what makes us tick. And so he sent a video in where he was calling. We said to call. I think he didn't quite pick up what we meant by calling. And so he made a video that goes a little something like this.
First Light, Nate.
Hello?
Called First Light. Nate answered.
How's it going?
Good, how about you?
Good, thanks. What's going on?
Do you guys sell any pants that like are okay to poop in?
Sorry, can you repeat that, man?
Do you sell any pants that are like okay to poop in?
Depends on how runny it is, you know?
No, I'm kind of
Answer,
serious
Nate.
though, because like I got this issue when I go out in the woods and like I always poop my pants.
Oh man, that's too bad.
So you don't sell anything that's like okay to poop in?
No, I can't say I'd recommend any pant, but I'm sure they'd hold up just fine to your normal set.
Okay, can I leave that as a recommendation or something that like it's maybe something you guys could look into? You guys come highly recommended. That's the only reason I'm calling you.
Yeah, I'll mark it down, man. No problem. What's your name?
It's Giannis. And last name's Ranella.
Okay.
All right, thanks a lot.
Nate is really the star of this
Have a
show.
great day.
You too.
Nate is really the star of that show. So now he's out. He says, call number 2. He's at Massanutten State Park in Plymouth, Massachusetts. It's LWCF funded.
But scouting right now.
He's calling
using,
Onyx.
The Onyx app. Do you guys have like a feature that shows where the deer are?
What do you mean by that?
Like where the deer are? Like don't you guys have like a GPS system that shows where the deer are?
Like, like the, no. Like shows you where a deer would be on the map?
Yeah, like if like where he is. Like I open up Onyx Maps and then it says there's a deer here and a deer here.
No, we don't have that capability or feature.
All right, can I put in a recommendation for that?
Yeah, certainly. I can definitely take down that feature request and
That's the guy.
ask our developers to see if there's anything that can be done to, consider inputting something that shows you where the deer are.
Yeah, I think that would be like a huge help for like, I don't know, for
Man,
if we're trying to find
These
deer. You know what I mean?
these employees deserve a raise. Customers always right.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, can I give you my name? My first name's Phil.
Son of a bitch.
Last name is Engineer.
Silence.
Okay.
All right, thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem, Phil. You have a great day.
You too.
Oh, man. His third call is to
Hello,
House
Mr.
Representative Joe
My name is
Kennedy.
Greg. I'm a part of your district, and I was just calling to encourage you to vote on the Great American Outdoors Act with no changes or clauses in there, just as the bill states. So thank you very much, and appreciate it.
And then there was an ending.
While you're rapping, tell them to vote for the Great American Outdoors Act. If you don't, you are probably a terrorist.
All right.
Greg Morse, everybody. Well done, Greg. I was going to give you the Nemo tent, but I felt like I want to reverse and give you the First Light kit. And I want Greg, I want you to call Nate.
After shitting in the pants.
Yeah. I want you to just call Nate and he'll help you with your kit.
Okay.
So that was well done, man.
Yeah.
Well done.
I'd say that was there's some prank calls I think that are just mean, unnecessary, cruel. I thought that was reasonable.
Reasonable.
Good fun.
The dude from Onyx was my favorite. I'll put that in the queue.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, sure. And then you feel bad because I when I used to work at Yeti, so the customer service people, you just want to like give them a hug when you see them. You're like,
I could never do it.
I can't do it. I could never do it. There's no way.
No, I one time when I was a kid, I prank called a Walmart with some friends, and I said I was allergic to folic acid, and I needed a breakfast cereal that did not contain folic acid. And we had this woman on the line for over an hour while she looked at the ingredients of every cereal. Turns out they all have folic acid. This poor woman probably making minimum wage at a Walmart. I feel so bad about that.
She probably went home. She was like, "Oh, what a day, honey." He's like, "What happened?" Some douchebag called and made me go over folic acid for an hour. We've all have things we regret.
I also like the reaction to Giannis Ranella.
Right. All right. See you later.
Okay.
Man. This is if you didn't already figure this out.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks to Nate from First Light and to Mike and Greg. And the last but not least, now this last one is uplifting. It's not really funny at all. but it's uplifting. And so the final entry, it's another video. It's a long video, so I'm not going to be able to play the whole thing for you. But I did ask the guys from Get Connected Outdoors to send me a clip that I could play that they felt was the best part of their video. Essentially, it's a 4-minute video of all types of people from all shapes and sizes, and they're all out there saying, like, I am recreated, like playing golf and swimming and shit. They're like, oh, look, here I am on the place. It's really good. Trust me. I probably didn't do it. Sorry, guys. I didn't do it.
If you're like us and you grew up playing on local playgrounds,
or if you're participating in sports
ladies.
like baseball or golf,
if you enjoyed the great outdoors through activities such as hiking, fishing, canoeing, or hunting,
or you hope your children or grandchildren will be able to enjoy any of these things,
then the Great American Outdoors Act is one that you should fully support.
Birds in the background.
Not only will you be contributing to the betterment of society for generations to come,
you will also be saying yes to the betterment of the lands, waters, and animals we all care for so deeply.
thank you. And remember, to get connected outdoors.
Boom.
Wow.
Woo!
That's like an ad I would see on YouTube.
Unbelievable. Phil didn't clap at all. That was great, man. Let's see. There's another clip because it goes for a while. What else we got here?
The Great American Outdoors Act is made up of 2 very important parts.
The birds?
One part, the Land and Water Conservation Fund, earmarks $900 million per year for things such as creating access to our public lands and waters, providing protection for our drinking water supplies, providing ball fields and playgrounds for our local cities and parks across the country, and many more conservation efforts.
The other part addresses deferred maintenance projects on federal lands across the country.
The projects that will be included are things such as fixing roads in our various national parks, work on natural population restoration projects for various fish and game animals, the removal of graffiti and trash throughout hundreds of properties, and much more.
And these projects will be overseen by the National Park Service, the Forest Service.
They got logos.
U.S. Fish and Wildlife
This is great, dude.
The more you know.
Bureau of Land Management.
The birds
Bureau
in the
of
back?
Indian Education.
It's the birds.
And will be funded for 5 years.
What kind of bird is that? Somebody write it. Tell me what kind of bird that is.
$9 billion to the National Park Service and the Public Land Legacy Restoration.
This dude is awesome. Fu Manchu, fucking tattoos. God, I'm feeling good about this.
That was a well-researched video.
If you watch the news, you might think that videos like this aren't even possible, that people couldn't even be inspired to make such a piece of work. But here they are because of the Great American Outdoors Act, because of you, Phil, because of THC. And so thank you, everybody. Thank you to the guys that Get Connected Outdoors, Alex and Zach, I believe, right? Yep, Zach and Alex for doing that. You should probably go find them on YouTube, and I'll share the link to that video so you can watch the whole thing. It is really cool for them to not only, I wonder if they had licensed that music, but get all the people in their lives together to celebrate the Great American Outdoors Act. So you guys are I'll try to make sure we get you a couple of Nemo tents, because there's 2 of you that made the video. We'll do what we can for that. Either way, you're a winner, and winning is all that matters here at THC. Play the jingle. Wait, is there no?
Oh, no, we don't have a jingle for this.
Okay, there's no jingle. So make sure you make a phone call. Make sure you write an email. Make sure you post on social media. Make sure you're talking about the Great American Outdoors Act. Boy, Phil, this is going to be an edit for you. Just usually leave all the mistakes I've made in.
That's fine, though. I'm going to ask for a raise.
This is
Ben's drinking too much. I need a raise.
It's not even. It was accidental. I was working hard for my family.
Oh, okay.
But without further ado, we got a long one today, so we'll get to the interview portion of the show. I will just say this: this is one of my favorite conversations I've had in a while, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Now, Phil, have you listened to it yet?
Not yet.
You will right after this.
It is on the docket for the day.
All right. You're gonna love it. I met Dr. Dan Staler actually conveniently at the BHA virtual rendezvous. Met is a term.
Sure. That's how we meet in this year 2020.
Yeah, use that shit loosely. But he's a predator biologist out there in Yellowstone National Park. And I would just say this: we've talked a lot about Yellowstone. We talk a lot about it in the conversation with Dan, like what it is, what it means to people. Is it flawed in its presentation of wild places? or is it an ambassador of wild places to people that can't go there or don't go there or don't live in proximity? Regardless of that, every time I go to Yellowstone National Park, it shows off in some way. It shows why it's a special place. It shows why people need to visit there and see it before they die. So that may be a little bit depressing. We're all going to die. But before you do, you should go to Yellowstone National Park. We went just for like a half a day, early in the morning, got up, drove to meet Dan. We're going to go use some GPS data point clusters to go see a possible kill site from a mountain lion named M220 that they've been tracking since May. So this is a mountain lion by that's had 17 kills since May. Since I think it was like May 5th. 17, it's killed 17 animals. Mostly elk calves or neonates, as they call them. But a neonate just means under a month old. And so it was cool to go and do that. But along the way, we saw coyote making a scrape. We saw a bunch of antelope going to water across this beautiful vista we had. We then did find the kill site. We then found a piece of black obsidian napped arrowhead that you would never find anywhere else. I've never found anywhere else. Right where we sat to do the podcast. And a bunch of elk came through during it. You'll hear the interruption that we had. So it's just, we were there for half a morning. Found some elk sheds on the way out, things like that. So Yellowstone's always showing off. But this conversation is important for a lot of reasons. It's important because we did a little in the field work. We learned how important the work of guys like Dr. Dan are. And then we talked about predators, why they should be in the landscape, what they mean to us, what we learned about them, what we have yet to learn about them, and why they kind of start and end the conversation in our culture about managing wildlife through hunting, why we should, why we shouldn't. Nobody's arguing that we should kill deer or not kill deer in most places. There's a few. But the argument whether we should hunt and kill grizzly bears, hunt and kill wolves, rages on. And so we addressed a lot of those topics. You will enjoy. I'm going to take you out to the field, to the middle of nowhere in Yellowstone National Park, where Dan and I are trying to find a cougar kill. Enjoy. So Dan, we're overlooking Gardner, right? Gardner, Montana. Gardner, Montana. I always wonder if I'm in Wyoming or Montana.
We are right now actually at the 45th parallel, straight down to our right. So we're hard to say if we're in Montana or Wyoming right now. We're right on the line. We're right on the line.
On the border. Yeah. Quickly describe just like what we're looking at here.
So we're looking at what we refer to as the Gardner Basin, the northern range of Yellowstone, and it is one of the premier wintering areas for a lot of Yellowstone's ungulates, elk, the hoofed animals, the elk, the pronghorn, bighorn sheep, mule deer, some white-tailed deer, bison, of course. And you're looking at it right here. We're in the heart and soul of it, and it's an incredibly important part of this system. Sustains a lot of the migratory herds that use this area and depend upon it in winter because of its lower elevation, less snowpack, forage availability. Of course, we're here in July, so we're looking at summer range starting to dry out. We've had some wet, pretty wet spring, but in early summer, but starting to get brown as it does. We got this little band of pronghorn here, and this is, where you see a lot of the pronghorn summering in the wintertime. They'll also settle into these lowlands right here in front of us, but Yellowstone River, of course, cuts out of the park right there, and that's sort of that migratory funnel for a lot of those ungulates, particularly the elk herd, the northern elk herd, kind of one of the most controversial, culturally significant elk herds in the region, really. Always has been. That's always been a big source of debate. We can talk about that later, but yeah, it's quite an area. It's I always think of this area as sort of our our American Serengeti. I live just across the way there. You can kind of see my house on the other side of the valley above the town of Gardner there, and it's not uncommon to look down and see everything: bison, pronghorn, bighorn sheep, deer, elk, all within your view shed. Packs of wolves use these cougars. This is all cougar country.
You ever feel like you're in a time machine?
Absolutely. I mean, childhood dream living in a place like this where you could go back in time and see what the landscape looked across our great country. We've got a vignette of it right here.
Yeah, this river just kind of connects everything and brings everything together. To stand here and know we're headed to possible kill site for a mountain lion and see a fawn, antelope, and a couple of does by the looks of it. This is, you never know what you're going to see in Yellowstone.
Absolutely.
And you've kind of got a backdoor pass, I imagine.
Absolutely. Feel very lucky to live here.
Well, let's go see what we can find.
Alrighty.
So we got a coyote about, 75 yards? He doesn't even seem like he cares much about us. What's he doing?
No. Looks like a younger coyote, maybe a yearling or something. He's could be in this area because there's a carcass here. We're about 60 yards from that cluster of that cougar's kill site, and so he might be lingering around. It could be just a good spot for him, but I just saw him do a little scrape scent mark there. Not that far away, so he probably sees us and maybe he's just curious. Of course, these guys in the park aren't getting bullets lobbed at him, so a little bit more
curious than ever.
More curious. Looks like he's got a little bit of a scrappy tail there, his summer coat. There he goes, trotting off. Yeah, looks like a young one.
I mean, I know that there's an adversarial relationship between wolves and coyotes.
Yeah.
If there's a mountain lion kill site today, generally
they will kill coyotes and they'll eat them.
Yeah.
Unlike wolves just kill them to kind of get them out of the picture. Cougars will actually feed on them. And it typically is around a kill site. Yeah. They're not actively hunting them, but they're opportunistic. Of course, you can hear ground squirrels right now around us, so he's probably hunting ground squirrels.
He looks like he's on the
Yeah,
run.
he does.
It's so interesting to be in a place like this and to see a coyote that normally, if he was living on a ranch down in the valley,
he'd be gone.
He'd be gone.
He'd be gone or he'd be gone.
It's like a study in conditioning, right?
It is,
wildlife are all conditioned.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's a cool sight.
That is. So what we're doing here, Ben, is we've got maybe 10 or so GPS points that were logged by the collar that this male lion wears. His number's M220. We collared him this winter. We actually collared him out by Tower Falls, so it's a good 20 some odd miles to the south of us here. And that was probably the core of his winter range. He's about, I think we aged him at about 3.5, 4 years of age. He was about 140 pounds. And, that's a younger Tom here. He's stuck around this summer, so we seem to, in our population, have right now a bunch of younger males coming into this area. We did catch just the other day over on that cliff band in back of us a big old gnarly, scarred up, mature Tom on one of our remote cameras. So he's probably the king around here, but these younger males are coming in and sorting out where they might slip in and establish a territory. And this male cougar we've been following the last 60 some odd days for predation work. He's ranged everywhere from here out to about 15, 20 miles that way, down into the Yellowstone River corridor and the Black Canyon of the Yellowstone, which is up and over that ridge right behind us. And he's just been looping around here for summer, making his kills, making his living, and establish maybe his territory. And this is the last cluster of our predation sequence. So ultimately, the objective of this work has been to understand cougar food habits and predation patterns and kill rate. How often are they killing? What are they feeding on? And that feeds into our long-term monitoring, and that then we can more accurately understand what role do cougars play here in Yellowstone.
Yeah. Well, I mean, too, how many cluster sites like this will you visit on a single lion in that time?
Yeah, and over that 60 days, this is a guess without looking at the numbers, I think a couple hundred clusters we've searched. Some clusters, we run the data that basically the way these GPS collars work is they last about 2 years based on how we have them programmed. That's dictated by the battery life of the collar. It is getting a fix every hour around the clock. And it uploads the data via a satellite that we can access on the computer, so we can check in. It's not real time, but it's usually lags by 12 to 24 hours. What we do is we wait for about a week's worth of data to accumulate. Then we run it through what we call a cluster model that basically identifies any cluster where you have 2 points, GPS points, within 200 meters of one another, and within 6 days. So what's beautiful about this technology to study predation in cougars is when a cougar makes a kill, you tend to cache it, and if they're not displaced by a bear or a pack of wolves, they will tend to stay on it for several days until it's used up. Of course, that depends on the size. If it's a small newborn fawn, they might only be there for half a day before it's gone. If it's an adult cow elk, they might be there for 4 or 5 days. But cougar clusters are usually kills are easy to identify with cougars, because once they make a cluster, they really kind of hone in on it. Once in a while, and particularly with males, they tend to be a little bit more exploratory and travel during kill events where they'll make a kill. For example, this male killed a couple weeks ago an adult cow elk down below us here. And he would go all the way during the day, travel all the way up, mile and a half that way to bed, up in the cliffs. I mean,
Really?
And for a cougar, they're all about concealing and being secretive, and that's a big part of their success, particularly in a landscape like Yellowstone, where you get grizzly bears, black bears, and wolves that are always trying to find food, and they're easily can displace cougars. And so his MO is to get somewhere safe and secure, out of sight. And males tend to do that. Sometimes males will also feed for a day and then do a big, travel for a day and then come back to a kill site. Females that make kills, female cougars, tend to stick right there. They also can get displaced, of course, too, and they have the whole risk if they've got kittens, where there's a risk of mortality there if a pack of wolves or another cougar even, or a black bear, grizzly bear comes in. But yeah, so a couple hundred clusters over the last 60 days. I don't know how many kills. Again, I'd have to look and see how many that is. But this male's been killing primarily elk. Of course, this study was designed during the peak calving period. June 1st in Yellowstone is thought to be sort of our major, pulse of elk calves, average calving date. Some are born late May, some are, born the last couple weeks even. But usually around June 1st. And so we kind of set this up to understand how many elk calves are getting. So his diet's been, I would say, primarily elk calves, but he's killed a couple spike bulls, yearlings, bull elk. He killed a mule deer fawn last week, newborn mule deer fawn. Cougar diet's pretty varied. It really kind of depends what's available to them. But this time of the year, young of the year, fawns and calves they're just easy. They're safer prey package for them to take down and handle. So yeah, that's kind of what we tend to find.
It's not a bad place for a cougar to live.
No, not at all. It's gorgeous right here, and they have access to good hunting grounds, but also good escape terrain.
Yeah,
very much part of it.
Let's go see what we find.
Yeah.
So you think that it's
about
possible?
10 yards from one point here, and we're in this thick patch of juniper, and this looks like probably a bed site up in here.
Yeah.
And what we'll do, and usually we can find hair where they bed. There's enough points here, and I'll just look at the map because they're kind of scattered. You get a little bit of error from the GPS caller, but it looks like bulk of the points are just through here.
Yeah.
But I think that's a bed site there. We'll come check that out. Oh yeah. So here we have elk calf.
Yeah.
Elk calf kill.
Imagine that.
Newborn. That's just what you would predict here. And this is pretty classic. I mean, there's not much left, right? You got what we're looking at here is the lower mandible. And of course you can easily identify it's a calf because you don't have the teeth eruption. Of course it's small too. It's only about 4.5 inches long from the tip down through the mandible. And you can see where they don't, they won't crunch up the teeth. That's just indigestible, hard to chew and crunch up. And then we see the skull cap here. So that crunched right into the skull cap. Of course, the brain would be a nutrient-rich source of food for any meat eater. And so they were quick to, that coot lion was quick to feed on that. And then we've got a front leg, the hoof, the lower leg, but you can see, they've crunched through it. In cougar's jaw, I mean, they have a really powerful bite force. They have a short rostrum, a short jaw, big powerful muscles, masseter muscles that wrap around the outside of their heads and attach to the top of their skull. And their teeth, of course, their carnassial teeth, their molars, premolars, top and bottom, make that really powerful bite force. So they're pretty big bone crunchers and eaters, and they do get a lot of nutrients from that, both from the bone itself and from the marrow inside. And this is pretty classic. I mean, a cougar that kills an elk calf will leave typically about this behind, which is just a bunch of bone shards.
Yeah.
The teeth, top of the skull, lower leg.
So they've ingested basically
everything.
Everything.
And what we'll do here is we'll look around to see if we see bear scat. My guess is, with a smaller prey package like this, this is an elk calf probably born in the first couple weeks of June, early June. And this kill was made on July 6th, so maybe it was about a month old.
Yeah.
It was probably, it could have been at that stage where it was hiding and mom was off grazing and coming back to nurse, or it could have just been taken down right here with this lion watching as a group of cows maybe filtered through in the evening or at night feeding through here. I'll look at the data. I think this cluster started in the middle of the night, which is more typical when cougars are out on the landscape hunting. They're active at night hunting.
So you imagine that the calving grounds are here, like maybe this elk was born in this
general
zone.
Area, yeah. I mean, at a month old, it could have been born, within a mile of here, I would say, at this area. But at that first month of life, they're staying pretty close to where they were born, unless mom wants to get up and move to summer range with it. This Gardner Basin area is important calving grounds for cow elk for sure. But what we'll do here is take a look and see if we see any sign. What I always try to do is we try to determine, was this cougar displaced by a larger carnivore? And that would either be a black bear, grizzly, or a pack of wolves. Based on how long he was here and the size of this, I would say he probably got most of this. You'll get ravens and magpies, eagles sometimes that come in, but the specialty of cougars, of what they're known for, is caching and concealing their prey, and that's that's an adaptation to really protect the hard-earned food resources. You can see here on the edge of this thick patch of conifer. My guess is you usually see a pile of grass where it was buried, and right here behind us, in this shaded area, probably it was back in here, I would guess.
Yep.
Maybe fed in right here.
Plenty of shade, plenty of concealment.
Bone shards in here. So this is probably where he dragged it to feed on. And you can see where it perfectly concealed. Ravens and magpies will have a hard time finding this. A little bit of tufts of hair there. This is the end of the scapula he chewed up.
So he would pull that calf back in here, cache it. Would he bury
it? Yeah, he might bury it. What we find with calves is it's a newborn calf is small enough that they might not necessarily cache it. They'll just start feeding on it. Certainly with anything larger than an elk calf, they almost automatically begin caching even before they feed, at least dragging to cover. So that's what he did here. I don't see any scat. This area could have both black bear and grizzly bear. I'm guessing he got most of the biomass on this calf.
Yep.
Which would be, I don't know, a newborn elk calf is gonna, be 20 some odd pounds, maybe the month old, 30, 40 pounds of meat. So good meal.
Well, how long will that satiate him for? Is he going to go, like you said, go off a couple of miles?
Yeah, typically we find, and this is, again, long-term, I'm kind of giving you averages here, but just to give you an idea, an adult male cougar, of course, with cougar life history, they don't play any role in feeding young. They're off on their own, and they only associate with females to breed. Females are the caretaker, they're the hardworking single mom. The males breed the female, usually in Yellowstone in late winter, although female cougars could get bred any time of the year. They cycle, estrus cycle once every 28 days or so. But we see a birthing pulse in May, June, and July in a place like Yellowstone because that's when a lot of food's out for moms. But a male like this typically will make a kill on average every 7 to 10 days.
Yeah.
Of course, it all is dictated by the size of the prey package. A small elk calf will sustain him for less time than a large animal. I forget exactly when his last kill was. Oh, I do remember. It was yesterday. We searched it. It was about 4 miles that way. It was a yearling bull elk, and there was a lot of black bear scat around it, and he was only at that site for about 15 hours. So my guess is what happened is he killed that, was kicked off by a bear, came down here, made this kill.
Spent a little more time here, right?
Yeah.
So you're like CSI Yellowstone.
Very much. I mean, it's really fun to come to these sites, look for the clues, look for the evidence, try to piece the story together. Of course, we have it's old school field biology. I mean, biologists have been doing this with carnivore research for 50, 60, 70 years. And we can go back to, our ancestors, out there using the same techniques to try to piece together where prey was or where competitors like carnivores were. So we employ those same tactics today, but we also benefit from the technology. I mean, you see me, I walked in here with a GPS unit. I had his GPS data loaded in here. We can come right to the site. It's a really powerful tool to get accurate data on what these animals are doing.
Yeah, and as you said, imagine it's from some people not as exciting as hunting, but incredibly important to our general knowledge base on how predation happens, right?
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many opinions and thoughts about what carnivores are doing and how they hunt and how they feed and what impacts they have, and we all have those opinions. I think what we as scientists really cherish is having, data, right? To really critically evaluate it and truly understand what's going on. Without cougars are a great example in Yellowstone. In the last 25 years, wolves have come back, right? And that was a huge conservation success story. It was very controversial. It is to this day. But I think what we've really learned is having really good information about what role an animal like a wolf or a cougar has helps us better understand how to whether we want to manage them, whether we don't want to manage them, like in a place like Yellowstone where we just step back and let nature take its course. We don't have the luxury of having protected preserves around our country like Yellowstone. So those of us that live in this area and hunt and fish and enjoy the landscape and our public lands and we have to coexist with all these animals, whether they're elk or cougars, and the more understanding we have of them, the better we are at living with them and protecting them and understanding what impacts we have on them and what our activities as humans have. So this all feeds into that, and it's really incredibly important.
Yeah, and you're definitely kind of at the kind of the nexus of we as Americans are drawn to these charismatic predators. We can explore that all day long, but we're definitely drawn to them. Yeah. Some people are drawn to them in a more sympathetic way. Mm-hmm. Some people in a more logical way, more pragmatic way. Some people based on, a lot of hunters, as we were talking about walking up here, a lot of hunters are drawn to them from the propaganda of, the last century where we needed to kill them all and displace them so we could ranch and live in relative, without, bears and cougars killing our calves and killing our cows and killing our profits. So you kind of sit at this strange, nexus of all those things happening together, and they all have influence.
They do, and we have, our species. We have this rich evolutionary history with these animals, right? Our ancestors competed with them for space, for food. They killed us. We killed them. That still happens today. And, they kind of represent this sort of stubborn, nagging conflict, and they can be very difficult to live with. There's no doubt about it. And if we look at the history of carnivores and how we've interacted with them and treated them and modern history, the last couple hundred years, it really has been shifted from one of complete persecution, just viewing them as not being just a thorn in our side. They shouldn't be here. Let's get rid of them. The place will be better. We'll have more of this. We'll have more of that. And we spent a large part of early human history on these landscapes in the greater Yellowstone getting rid of them. You look at Teddy Roosevelt's journeys here to Yellowstone in the late 1800s, 1890s. He came here, and there's this great story that he writes about, and it's in the park archives of him here wanting to come and hunt a cougar. Yeah. It was a very big part of it. Of course, he was, as many people know, his rich history as a hunter and as a conservationist. And it was really interesting to see Teddy Roosevelt shift about predators and carnivores from his experiences here in Yellowstone National Park. When he came here to this area in the 1890s, I think 1891 was one of his first visits in this area. He wanted to hunt a cougar. He wanted to hunt elk. When he wrote about this landscape, he wrote about Yellowstone being this kind of last reserve for the elk, right? He didn't talk about how predators had eradicated the elk. He talked about how market hunting, and he was very accurate in his perception of understanding, we almost lost, an elk on this landscape because of market hunting in this region. Yellowstone really kind of epitomizes that. And you look at Teddy Roosevelt's early observations of carnivores here, and he particularly was interested in the cougar, and he had a shift, and he came back and wanting to hunt a cougar. There was a lot of worry about public perception, what that would look like of killing something in a park, and there was a lot of politics involved with the going back and forth, and In the end, he was finally at a point where he advocated, like, look, maybe we should not be hunting cougars in Yellowstone. And what he saw was an elk herd that started to increase in abundance. He saw some severe winters and winter starvation. Of course, he had experience with cattle starvation on his ranch out in the west, and where he saw the devastating effects of winter. And he was seeing an elk herd here with an abundant elk herd and elk just dying and suffering. And then he all of a sudden was like, hey, maybe predators play a role here. And that was very wise. It wasn't a popular opinion at the time. And he and George Bird Grinnell really, started the stage of understanding how you can have landscapes with predators. Now, don't get me wrong, he still hunted predators, but he was early in his time to recognize that these landscapes that have predators, might benefit by that.
Well, and this is where there's so many, fissures in these lines of thinking that take you places. But one of the things I think of that I've heard said a lot is the term ecosystem services. Like, what role do these play? And that gets into, I'd love to talk a little bit about like trophic cascade and some of these ideas where each one of these animals plays some role here. Removal of that role, nature abhors a vacuum, right? So removing all the predators does create, a different ecological environment. So it's an interesting thing, but, moreover, what is it like to be an elk without a wolf? What is it like to be a wolf without an elk? And so these animals kind of are made to be what they've always been by the presence of that other species.
Exactly. Yeah. So many of the traits that we as hunters admire in these animals that many people are just so passionate about having experience with on the landscape and have been shaped through predation. Predation is one of the most powerful ecological forces that has shaped life on Earth for millions of years. Shaped us. And what we know about an animal like a wolf or a cougar and having predator populations interacting with prey is that, they largely depend on vulnerable prey, the young, the old, the sick, the weak. That has time and time again, every predator study has continued to demonstrate that they can't kill anything they want. And I'd like to talk about that later, sort of the limits of predatory ability of these carnivores, because I think that's a very misunderstood concept of how these animals hunt and what it takes to feed themselves. But, through predation, you get a lower prey abundance, you get a culling, you have in the end tend to have an ungulate herd, a prey population herd that is healthier, but whatever metric you look at, whether it be productivity, recruitment, reproductive success, body condition. There are, of course, many other factors that shape that, whether bottom-up processes like forage quality. I mean, predation is only one part of that story, of course, but it's a vitally important part of it. And in terms of how food webs operate, nutrient cycling, through that top-down pressure of predation, you have nutrients going through this whole system. If we look here at this site in front of us, you got this elk calf remains. There's not much left, but you're going to get nutrients leaching from whatever's left there down into the soils. That's going to be important for this group of plants here in this area, for hundreds of species of invertebrate that come into the site and depend upon that, beetles, flies. It's just all part of that nutrient cycling from top down to bottom up.
Right now, the mosquitoes are depending on me. I got the right blood type, it seems, for that. But yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting. What drives me too, and I was telling you coming up here, I'm like, if my wife would let me, and I ever get independently wealthy, I'm gonna become a wildlife biologist because of what you said. There's so many elements to your job, CSI, Yellowstone, but also just understanding all of the very nuanced ways that these things interact. Which I think for somebody that listens to this show or has heard us talk about paleoanthropology and zoology and all these other things that are tangential to hunting or parallel to the activity, you start to just get immersed in this world that is endless and ever-changing, and it's just like this cause and effect.
And it's complex, and I think that in itself is part of the challenge of when we talk about predators and their impacts on prey. There's no one simple answer to it. What's happening here in Yellowstone is not necessarily what's happening, in the Bitterroot of Montana. What's happening here under our management, the Park Service's management goal mission, which is stepping back, natural regulation. We don't manage carnivore numbers. We don't manage elk numbers. Now, of course, we think of Yellowstone as sort of this pristine, baseline, wild place, and it very much is relative to what is around us, right? but there's still human impacts here, right? I mean, we've got right now in the park, probably 30,000 people driving around right now. We'll have, several million visitors to the system this year. We've got development, we've got landscape changes, we've got climate change. There's so many things operating together, and it's very difficult to give a soundbite, bullet point, simple answer to, hey, what impact do wolves have on elk, or cougars have on elk, or what's driving elk population dynamics. A place like Yellowstone, where we have one of our most abundant and diverse carnivore assemblages, we have one of our most robust, intact, large mammal terrestrial systems with bison and pronghorn and bighorn sheep and mule deer and moose and elk all interacting on these landscapes. We're truly lucky to have this landscape, but it is complex. And our job as biologists, as scientists, is to try to tease out how things are working here, what is shaping the structure and function of Yellowstone. And it provides a great baseline to then look at places outside of a protected preserve like Yellowstone, whether it's the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, whether it's other parts of the Rocky Mountain West. You name it. It provides an incredibly valuable reference point to compare it with other places.
I like that you say that too, because when I first started coming here, I was a little depressed by the lines of traffic and the people jumping out in their flip-flops and their board shorts to take pictures of buffalo. And I had this conversation with my wife, and I think she felt it was a little reductive. Like, this is beautiful. Why are you here to kind of like stomp on this thing? And then it was explained to me, I can't remember who explained it, that the park is kind of like an ambassador to wild places. It's not completely wild, but it allows people to kind of see and appreciate these wild animals in these places in a way that you might if you were, kind of going to an amusement park. Or a zoo, right? So it's important for somebody like me. I'm sure you hate to see those types of interactions, but you do understand that even in your work, it's like you said, a reference point for, the Gallatin National Forest and other places that we need to understand.
We've lost so much of our natural landscapes of wild nature across so many parts of our world, right? And thank goodness for the strong conservation efforts over the last 100 years. Look at what's happening right now, and with the great American Conservation Outdoors Act. We are, as a country, we place a high value on nature and wild ecosystems. And you might have a family from an urban area that has really doesn't have a clear concept of what that means or how much that was part of their heritage necessarily, but they can come to Yellowstone and for a day or two they get a glimpse of what nature is like and what it's been like in so many places. And it's different from the nature in their backyards, it's different from the nature in their community parks. Those are all incredibly important things that we tap into for our spirit and our soul. But Yellowstone is this vignette of what much of North America looked like for thousands and thousands of years, and it's truly special in that regard.
People can understand why they're drawn to the wild places and understand how exciting it is to see something like a buffalo walking across a meadow in Yellowstone with a with a paint pot bubbling behind it or whatever. They can see, like, I'm drawn to that. I value that. Maybe I don't know why, because I don't see it every day. Maybe I don't have this intricate understanding of this value system, but man, I feel something.
And it's real. It's raw. It's not fake. It's not phony. There's so much fake and phony in our world today. And to come to a place, look at us. We're sitting here looking at a hoof and a lower leg of an elk calf that a 150-pound cougar fed on last week. And it doesn't get any more, wild and real than that.
Well, even walking up here, you're like, thank you. Yellowstone never seems to disappoint in terms of wildlife. You walk up here, there's antelope, pronghorn antelope kind of grazing, and then we see a juvenile coyote kind of prancing along, doing his thing, and we come up here, and who knows what else you'll run into. We run past an elk shed down there. So, you could walk around in other pieces of public ground in this country and not have those experiences in a full day. And so it's Yellowstone. I've never been somewhere in Yellowstone where it didn't kind of show off its value.
Exactly.
Like, hey, look at all the stuff
we
have. Look at what we are. And then, certainly we can talk more about kind of the very human struggle to understand what our impact to all these wild places, to all these animals. And now we have recently, the judge's decision to take the Yellowstone grizzly bear population and put them back on the endangered species list. And a similar debate around wolves in Colorado. Should we introduce wolves to Colorado? So, all this stuff, and it's, when I would say this, and I think maybe you feel it too as a hunter, there's kind of like the baseline opinion. There's like the standard hunter opinion, no wolves. The standard hunter opinion, let's hunt grizzly bears. I understand those opinions. I agree with them in a lot of ways, but I'm also driven to like, what don't I know? What am I not being fed here? What about these predators am I missing? And so hopefully we can talk about that more too.
For sure.
Well, let's do some more investigating, then we'll go.
Sounds good.
Take a seat and talk more.
Sounds good.
O'Reilly Auto Parts are in the business of keeping your car on the road. O'Reilly Auto Parts offer friendly, helpful service and the parts knowledge you need for all your maintenance and repairs. If you're confused about what part you need, like what wipers are going to be the best, what replacement headlights are going to be the best, go into O'Reilly and talk to the people that work there because they're great and they're super friendly and they'll get you squared away where you walk out knowing you got the right thing. They've got thousands of parts and accessories in stock, either in-store or online, so you never have to worry if you're in a jam. Do you need your windshield wipers replaced? You need a brake light fixed? You need some quick service? They'll help you find the right part or point you to the nearest local repair shop for help. The professional parts people at O'Reilly Auto Parts are your one-stop shop for all things auto do-it-yourself, and you can find what you need in-store or online. Stop by O'Reilly Auto Parts today or visit us at O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. That's O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today. You ever get that feeling you're stuck inside staring at screens and a primal urge kicks in? You crave wide open spaces, fresh air, the chance to connect with the land? Well, maybe it's time to find your own piece of the wild, but searching for property can be a maze. That's where Land.com comes in. They got millions of listings across the country, from mountain ranches to hidden fishing holes. Their search tools are like a seasoned guide helping you narrow down what you want. Land.com isn't just about buying and selling. It's about finding a place to hunt, fish, explore, or simply sit by a campfire and listen to the crickets. So head over to Land.com today to turn one day into today, because trust me, there's nothing quite like the feeling of standing on your own piece of earth.
All right, Dan, we're up here now, sitting overlooking what you called the Serengeti, which I very like the description. And funny enough, you'll hear some wind there as you're listening. We're sitting on a little shelf on a ridge, overlooking the Yellowstone River that runs down into Gardner. And it's interesting. We just walked up here, sat down for a nice place to do this, and here is a piece, like a napped partial arrowhead that's black obsidian, like the most beautiful black obsidian I've ever seen.
It's gorgeous. Some ancient human hunter. We just got done searching a cluster of a cougar and found where he preyed on an elk calf. Yeah. And here we are looking at some ancient Yellowstone human hunter.
Yeah.
Tools of his trade.
Yeah, there's a little kind of a bench in front of us that, it looks almost like a little bowl, and that's turning into a meadow, and you can imagine that ancient hunter's family might have been down there cooking up some ancient food while he was out trying to find more.
Yeah. And what's really neat about Yellowstone obsidian is, there's the various sources throughout the park. One of the most prominent is Obsidian Cliff, as you head south towards Norris Junction. And, they've traced, there's a unique chemical signature to obsidian from that region, and you can use it to trace obsidian throughout. And This was an incredibly important source material for weapons for many tribes, and it was traded. And Yellowstone obsidian from Obsidian Cliff has been found all the way out into the Great Plains. So
many places,
kind of in the epicenter of that.
As I was just saying down there at the kill site, Yellowstone never seems to disappoint. With its ability to kind of provide these little moments for you. Whether you're a tourist or like yourself, you spend all this time doing this. Like right now, I could see a bunch of antelope kind of gathered around a little watering hole there. Yeah. It's like a nice place if a hunter wanted to. Kind of either an ancient or modern hunter wanted to take a look at an antelope. That'd be a place to be. But we already kind of, as we were down there looking around, we talk a lot about kind of learning about these animals. And as much as I like to highlight some of the more societal and cultural and even in the wildlife management sense, some of the debates, some of the issues around these animals, what really we can do, moreover, is learn a little bit about them, what they do, why they do it, what you've learned about not only their predation habits, but their personalities and what they mean to these ecosystems, and then what that can tell us as we go out into the world and have these debates, talk about these very important issues, try to figure out where these animals belong, and what we should do to help manage them.
Yeah. I mean, carnivores really do, as we were mentioning earlier, represent this very misunderstood group of animals in large part because of that long history we have with them as a competitor. There's an element of fear when you don't know about something, and much of that fear is rooted in our ancient psyche because of really having to compete and live with these animals and coexist with them. And in the modern day, I mean, that's carried over, and there's a great deal of misunderstanding about them. Everyone's got opinions about wolves, right?
Yeah.
We all do.
Yeah.
And when you have an animal that can be difficult to live with, whether it be a grizzly, a wolf, a cougar, any of these large carnivores, those opinions can really cloud how we can coexist with them, and whether that means, at what level can a population be hunted? What level should a population be protected? Just the truth about what role they play. And you can look at both extreme sides of opinions about these animals. The prominent wolf biologist L. David Meach wrote an article a number of years ago about wolves neither being saints nor sinners, and really tried to demonstrate to a wider audience this idea that we place a lot of value judgment on these animals. And we always, those of us that work closely with these animals, we always talk about the fact that there very few people start conversations about wolves, about what they can't do. It's always like what they can do. Like, look how great they are for these ecosystems. Look how bad they are for these ecosystems.
Yeah. That's what I love that piece of it, because as we were walking up here again, we're talking about what I want to try to get away from and shirk is this idea that I have to come to these very important issues, especially, what we do with wolves and bears, grizzly bears especially, come to these very important issues with an idea that I'm defending or an idea that I'm trying to, favor agreement with.
Yeah.
And that's what, we try to shirk and go away from. And I think that your understanding of what these animals do here in Yellowstone is a foundational element to approaching these issues with what do we know about these animals? What do we know about what they can't do, what they can do, right? And then move forward with trying to make an educated decision, which is in a complex environment, and there maybe isn't one right answer,
right?
Because as you well know, wildlife biology and wildlife management is always shifting and changing.
Yeah. So Ben, maybe we could just take a quick look at the history of carnivores here to set the stage, and then we can let and you tell me if that works for you. But it provides a good baseline understanding, how we got a couple thousand years ago of having a system with all its pieces together to a system that was largely degraded through the removal of carnivores, a heavy management of elk and other species, to now in 2020, we're looking at a Yellowstone that is operating largely unfettered by heavy management and human impacts. And
let's maybe start with where we are, just very briefly where we are today, because we'll run back up to it. But where we are today, in your estimation, let's say outside of Yellowstone, predators and their native habitats and how would you paint that picture for everyone? Because again, we're kind of at the seat of it all here.
Yeah.
But how do you think about it as a biologist?
As a biologist, if you look and you just look at North America or the United States, let's choose the lower 48. Okay,
Sure.
We're looking at a landscape that used to be rich in large carnivores, from the west coast to the east coast to the border with Canada down into Mexico, and that was a landscape defined by wolves, by cougars, by jaguars in the south, by grizzly bears, black bears, and then of course those middle-sized carnivores, coyotes, and they were everywhere. I mean, if you just look at the cougar, it is historically the most widely distributed large carnivore in the Western Hemisphere, all the way up into the Yukon, down to the tip of South America. The gray wolf in North America, one of the most widely distributed large carnivores. And today, we see, we'll just choose one of those. We see the cougar largely restricted to the western side of the United States. We have healthy, robust populations in many of our western states. They're not, they're at threatened areas for sure. Very healthy in other parts. The gray wolf, largely restricted to the Rocky Mountain West. We have the small pocket of wolves down in the American Southwest, the Mexican wolf subspecies, and we have wolves, and of course the Great Lakes stakes. But very much restricted from their former range. Grizzly bears, incredibly restricted, right? We're looking at bears in really small population areas, the greater Yellowstone, the Glacier area, National Park area, and northwest Montana. So, we see carnivores today in a very small proportion of the historic representation on these landscapes. In a place like Yellowstone, of course, that was we can celebrate that we now have restored carnivores back to this landscape, really in only the last 30 years. Of course, the historic wolf reintroduction in 1995 and 96. Cougars naturally recolonized on their own in the 80s. Grizzly bears benefiting from the Endangered Species Act, recovering in very much a large part of the greater Yellowstone and doing very well now. And we can really tout our hard conservation efforts as a society to getting where we are today. Yellowstone is as rich in its carnivore assemblage as it has been in the last 150 years. And so that's where we are today. But in many places where they used to be, they aren't across the country. And of course, you can't have carnivores in many parts of the country anymore. Biologically, that the ecology of the landscape just isn't there for them, but also more importantly, socially. We talk about carnivores being this sort of stubborn, nagging conflict challenge to coexist with and live with, and we've learned a lot on how to do so. But for those reasons, they have trouble being in a lot of places where they used to be and never will be again. And so, but that's where we are today. And I think,
how do you see? We're here looking at a mountain lion kill site. I could probably, if I spent enough time by the Hollywood sign, I would probably check out a similar animal. And I think that just denotes something to think about as we go through this conversation. On both sides of that fence, you have, an environmentalist, a protectionist view that says, we're not going to hunt these animals. Yet, the hunter would say, well, we have to manage this population in these urban areas. You're probably going to have to kill these animals anyway. Why not allow hunters to take part in that? And I think that's one that, we talk about all the time, how they're building wildlife underpasses and overpasses and many highways in California. And so there's, that dynamic's an important thing to think of, I think.
It is. I think what we've learned a great deal about is actually just how well we can coexist with large carnivores, given certain baseline needs for both human and the carnivore. Carnivores need food, obviously. They need space to live in, and most importantly, they need to live in a landscape where there is not human persecution for them to be successful. Humans need safety and security because carnivores can be a risk. Any wildlife can be a risk to a person. There are lots of risks in our lives every day that we face. And so if you kind of take those things into consideration on both what the carnivore's needs are and what the human needs are, as sort of your framework, we still have a great capacity to coexist with them. And yes, here we are in a wild national park, and we've got a cougar kill down below us. But you're right, you could be in Griffith Park, outside the Hollywood sign, and come across the identical looking, kill. It would be a deer kill in that area, perhaps, and
poodle, maybe a poodle kill.
Poodle, and and what a mountain lion needs in Southern California is the ability to move across a landscape without getting hit by a car, to be able to not get poisoned by rodenticide, which is a challenge in some of these urban areas where they interact. So, and a capacity and willingness for humans to be tolerant of them, and that's a hard thing, and that's what we struggle, I think, the most with, is the sort of the societal acceptance of coexisting, the willingness to. Case in point, right here, the town of Gardner. A couple of weeks or about a month ago, there was a cougar in town, a cougar family in town, and the state of Montana, following their management plan, did the best they could to deal with the situation. It was in someone's backyard. It killed a deer. It probably wasn't a threat to anyone. It probably would have moved on eventually after it made its kill. But there was a concern by a particular landowner, and the state responded, and that cat was removed. And many people in the community struggled with that. How do we? Can't we do better? We're Gardner with the edge of a national park, but others said, hey, I was worried. It was in my backyard. I was a threat, and that's sort of a day in and day out sort of example of what we deal with. I think it's much more accepting for people to have carnivores where we are around us, obviously, than when you're in an urban area or even a small mountain town like Gardner.
Would you say it's easier? It's easier for it to go that way. It seems to me. It's easier because everybody you run into, as soon as you feel unsafe, you want to halt that feeling. You want to stop that threat. That's as natural for us as natural as for a predator to want to kill a deer in somebody's backyard. So I think that's probably the easier way out, the more human way out, which sets up it's harder to coexist, right? People don't want to have to make those decisions. And again, that decision being made, it's easy to say, I want all mountain lions to live until there's one in your backyard munching on a deer.
Yeah, right. And, and I think part of that is education. I mean, I think the more we learn about them, the more we learn about, what are the real risks of having this cougar in my backyard. And, we don't want a wild animal like a cougar just hanging around town. I mean, there can be, things like habituation that occur more commonly with things like bears or coyotes. But as soon as that line is crossed with habituation and food reward, and that wasn't the case with this particular example I just gave, but that is a common case. A black bear was just removed in Yellowstone a couple days ago at a campsite because it came into camp and started feeding on campers. It actually bit a woman. It was habituated.
Oh, really?
It was food habituated. She's okay, fortunately. And the park acted quickly and removed that bear. And that is a bear that has gotten a food reward. And so, we struggle with that every day in a place like Yellowstone, is how do we keep Yellowstone wild, yet still provide that visitor enjoyment? And carnivore, we can look at the person going up close to the bison. We can look at the person going close to the elk, people approaching bears. That excitement, that experience with wild nature is so foreign to so many people that you forget. Reasoning goes out the window. And so we struggle with that as a park, yet, at our core, we really value having a place where people can still experience that.
Well, I've said this, and you're probably more inclined to say no comment to this, but I can say what I want. So I have thought about this, and I thought we were talking earlier about Yellowstone as like an ambassador to wild places for folks that don't get to see this, that don't get to experience this in kind of a more visceral level. I think maybe Yellowstone's like, listen, I'll let you have that relationship with me, but I'm going to take a few of you. A few of you are going to get bitten. A couple of you are going to get gored. This is the tax that you must pay for me to allow you to come here with your RVs and with your and to act like this is just a drive-by wilderness. And the wilderness is like, nah. Here's some reality, because that's for us to kind of treat it that way as humans. There is some amusement to be gained. There is some that again. We've discussed the value of that given the disconnection with these landscapes. Yeah. But also reality of nature. Every once in a while, just decides to show itself, which is an interesting dynamic.
And that as managers in Yellowstone, we struggle. Many people struggle and have through history in this park is what is wild, what is natural, what is pristine, what is wildness, and the best we can do when it comes to things like wildlife, for example, is really some people come out here and see a bison grazing near the road, or they see a radio-collared wolf. We get this a lot, and to them that's somehow less wild.
Yeah.
I always battle that back by saying, what's about that wolf that's wearing a collar, or that bison grazing on the lawn in Mammoth? I mean, what's not wild about those animals having to survive the 4 seasons of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem? A wolf has to run up every couple days and grab onto an elk with its mouth and take it down. Has to fight off a grizzly bear at a kill.
Subarus and Volvos.
What's not wild about that? But, when I think at our core, when we define wildness and our animals here, and yes, we have human tolerance, we do have habituation in some cases, but, having an animal that can live out its life under the natural ecological, subject to the ecological forces of nature, surviving, feeding, raising young, breeding, and largely protected from human impacts. That's really what we're striving for. And vast majority of what you see with Yellowstone's wildlife adheres to that.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to promote and protect here.
Yeah, you could push back on that. It'd be like the least wild thing about it is you.
Yeah.
You're the least wild thing about this wilderness.
Yeah.
And that's something that we all just have to live with.
Yes.
We're never going back.
No.
We're not going to go back.
No.
And nor do we want to go back.
No.
So we just have to live with this dichotomy and work with it, as you have to every day, I'm sure, to understand this place.
And people, there's a thirst, there's a desire, whatever background you come from, whatever landscape you grew up in, urban or wild or otherwise, when you come to a place like Yellowstone, there is this thirst for raw wild nature, and you have that opportunity to experience that here, and people deal with that in different ways and embrace it in different ways. But it really is the treasure of this place is those of us that are fortunate to live in these wild areas in general. In a place like Montana, we do see that all the time.
Yeah. Yep.
But for many, this is their one shot at that. Maybe their once in a lifetime opportunity, and I think that resonates with many people.
And I was telling you, as a kid from the East Coast, to come out here, and I was telling you some stories when we first met down there in Mammoth. I've seen wolves. We saw wolves bear hunting this year. We heard a wolf howl while I was hanging a trail camera a couple of weeks ago with a buddy of mine. We've seen wolf tracks. We've seen grizzly tracks. We've seen grizzly scat. All of these represent this seminal experience that kind of can only happen in proximity to the Rocky Mountains.
Yeah.
And that's what I think brings people like you and I. You're from Connecticut originally.
Vermont.
I'm sorry. Here, because you understand, the Pleistocene, and you understand these ideas.
I grew up dreaming.
So did I.
Dreaming of being on a landscape with Pleistocene landscape, and Yellowstone's the closest thing I've come to that.
Well, and then you think of I grew up watching Lonesome Dove, and I always thought if only I could ride a horse from Texas, from the Del Rio all the way up to Montana.
Yeah.
To Paradise Valley. If only. Couldn't do that, but certainly could drive a U-Haul.
Yeah.
And so that's what we did. But yeah, I mean, so to back to the animals themselves, and we understand. I think maybe let's start what you've learned about these animals, and then maybe move through their roles in the ecosystem, because that's ultimately the connective tissue to the debate.
Yeah.
In your job, describe your interactions with these predators. What predators you interact with most, and kind of go through each one, and then let's talk about kind of what you've learned over the years.
Sure. So my job here in Yellowstone is for the Park Service. I'm a wildlife biologist, and I've been here for 23 years. And throughout that whole career, I've largely been involved with the Yellowstone Wolf Project, and as well as the Yellowstone Cougars here. And those are my two chief roles, in addition to overseeing and help manage the elk research program. And of course, those three animals, wolves, cougars, and elk, are sort of that trifecta of predator-prey dynamics here in this ecosystem. And ultimately, our goal is to understand, of course, wolves, I came in here a year and a half after the last wolves were brought back down from Canada, released from pens, and from that moment forward, the Yellowstone Wolf Project had the vision early on. Project leader Doug Smith, Mike Phillips, originally Doug Smith took over in '97. That vision that we've had throughout the last 25 years is to understand this wonderful experiment of bringing back a carnivore after it was gone for 70 years, and understanding its biology, and furthermore its relationship with its primary prey, being elk, and of course other species too. Our program is meant to be a broad view of wolf biology, but more importantly, community ecology, like all the pieces put together.
I
That's
love
really
that.
the value
Love
of it.
that term. I'm sure that's a very important term.
I don't think of myself as a wolf biologist or a cougar biologist, but a biologist trying to understand how these carnivores and their prey interact on this landscape. And so, a big part of that work is a lot of hard data collection every year, every winter, every summer. Studies have been put in place from the very beginning to study these animals. And a big part of that is understanding their population dynamics, so counting them.
Yep.
Understanding.
Let's take a little break from the
just
conversation.
take a break from the conversation. We got a couple elk running over here.
Glass some elk here.
I caught them earlier running down that drainage. They seem to be moving pretty good, and I don't know if they're just something pushed them out of that drainage, or they're just
they're kind of
trying to get into a new area. Or the flies are bugging them.
They're moving down here. There's a little bit of water.
Yeah, that could be. They're
down
trying to
here.
go down in that cool marshy area.
It is cooler down there in the bottom where that kill
sure.
site was, for sure. But yeah, as as I'm sitting here, I'm like, we're not seeing much. We're gonna see something. It's
like,
Yellowstone.
is it two cows?
Two cows.
Maybe that one in the back's a younger one.
Younger
yearling,
cow,
maybe?
yeah.
Not a calf, but yearling maybe?
No, yearling, and then an adult.
Yeah, maybe it's her mom.
Yeah, 3 or 4 year old looking cow. And I have.
That's great.
Yeah, I drew a B tag for cows right up the Paradise Valley.
314.
So, yeah, 314. Oh, hey.
See you out there.
Yeah, I'll see you out there.
So one of the main goals is counting the predators. How many do we have? How many wolves do we have? How many cougars do we have? And that's harder than you think. It requires a lot of work. With wolves, the best tool we have to count them is collaring them.
Yeah.
Each year we use a helicopter. We dart wolves from the helicopter. We put a collar on them. We try to get a couple individuals within a pack wearing collars, and that allows us throughout the year to follow that pack. We monitor them from the air, from the ground. Yellowstone is, of course, one of the best places to view wild wolves, and so our studies have been largely observational in addition to the radio collars, and that's really given us very accurate counts. How many packs do we have? How many wolves do we have in a pack? Who are the breeders? How many pups are born? How many pups survive? And that's kind of the heart and soul of understanding their population dynamics. And then we want to understand their food habits. And so we do primarily two main field seasons in the wintertime and in the summertime. And we do a 30-day predation study early winter, 30 consecutive days. Early winter, of course, elk are in their best shape. They've come off a summer and fall of good forage, good fat reserves. They're much more difficult for wolves to kill. Mm-hmm. And then we look at it for 30 days in the month of March. That's the tail end of winter. That's when elk are most vulnerable to winter predation. They're kind of at exhausting body reserves. And so we try to understand those bookends of the winter season to see what that winter effect is of predation. We also do the same work in May, June, and July for predation, again, to look at what those summer predation patterns are. And that's what made Yellowstone unique. And really, we've embraced both old school field biology as well as technology like GPS collars. We still rely on the classical bush pilot that flies the Super Cub for us over the years. We've had some really talented, magnificent pilots, and we take on volunteer technicians in the winter and the summer, and thousands and thousands of hours, thousands and thousands of miles over 25 years has given us probably one of the best pictures of predation in a predator-prey system worldwide.
Yeah.
And we're very proud of that. And so that's what we do with wolves. With cougars, there's been different periods of cougar research. They did not get reintroduced to Yellowstone. They came back on their own in the 80s. Cougars benefited by becoming you could say their conservation is largely benefited by becoming a trophy, having trophy game status. There were also protections in place in the 60s and 70s in many of the Rocky Mountain Western states. Bounties were eliminated. They became quota systems and regulated in seasons, and that set the stage for their recovery to a place like Yellowstone. So they kind of crept back in on their own, and there are several phases of research that occurred in the late 80s prior to wolves being reintroduced. It created this wonderful experiment to then look at what happens when you reintroduce a top predator, another predator who's a major competitor, the wolf. Yep. And so then there was a wonderful study led by Tony Ruth, a fabulous biologist that led that study post wolf reintroduction for about 6 years. And then I started back up the study in 2014, which is still ongoing now. And so we've had these little snippets of cougars, and same thing. How many do we have, and what are their food habits?
Does that include the trophic cascade? Kind of this idea of how? Can you explain that? I guess sure. I always mention that. I want to make sure people understand.
So, Yellowstone has, I'd say the first real ecological study that, well, there's a couple, but one of the ones that might be most familiar to students from high school biology would be the work in the marine systems with sea otters and urchins and kelp forest, and understanding what happens when you disrupt a food web, relatively simple food web structure where you have a top predator, you have its primary prey, the herbivore, and then you have the first level of the food web, which is the plant that those herbivores depend on, and what happens when you disrupt that link. And the idea of a trophic cascade is you have these top-down influences occurring where a predator can influence both its prey through direct killing or, let's say, behavioral changes. So we have, sort of direct and indirect effects on its primary prey, which can in fact linked effects down to that next trophic level, which would be the vegetation community. So in a place like Yellowstone, sort of the classic story that's out there is that, with the absence of a top predator, wolves and cougars for 70 years, our elk herd became incredibly abundant, overabundant, you could say, and that started having impacts on forage. And one of the focuses of that story has been on the woody browse. Right below us here, we see our aspen stands. You got your cottonwoods, you have your willow communities. Those are relatively a small part of the Northern Range ecosystem. It's more of a grassland system,
especially
right?
here,
Especially here, but it has been an important part of the history here. There's certainly beavers play a role there in that history of willow and aspen, if you go back through the park's history and their elimination. But essentially what the idea was that in the absence of the top predator, you had overgrazing or overbrowsing in this sense of this woody browse, and that basically suppressed these vegetation communities, which are incredibly important to many species, whether it's songbirds, beavers, aquatic insects. These are really important aspects of these woody browse communities. But and in the restoration of carnivores, and the focus has been on wolves with the Trophic Cascade story, you kind of restored that. I always hate the balance of nature, but nature is never quite in balance. But the concept that most people are familiar with, you restored that relationship between the links of your top predator, your primary consumer, and then your primary productivity of your plants. And in doing so, you restricted the browse. You started having willow and woody browse communities growing back, and that became very popularized. The story of trophic cascades.
There's signs in the park I've seen before to this.
Educational
idea,
signs. Right? National Geographic, television shows. That famous or infamous YouTube video of how wolves have changed the rivers. Taking a very complex issue and trying to boil it into something simple. Really what we view of what's happened in this landscape relative to trophic cascades is we do believe that the restoration of wolves, but more importantly, the restoration of our carnivore community as a whole, grizzly bears, cougars, and wolves, have shifted that dynamic between elk behavior, browsing patterns, and yes, you have seen some vegetative communities like willows and aspens and cottonwoods start recovering because of those roles of those carnivores. Now, there's other things at play.
Sure.
I think what is the misconception about trophic cascades is that it is a wolf-triggered trophic cascade. And because people see what the major difference was is that, mid-1990s, wolves were reintroduced. That's when a lot of some of these studies took place to start measuring growth of aspen and willow rebounding. And it is true, wolves have been an important part of that story. They helped bring back down the high-density elk populations, lowering them, but along with wolves were cougar predation, grizzly bear predation, black bear predation on elk calves, coyotes, and of course, let's not forget, right over here to our left, as we look outside the park, this is the Gardner Basin, Eagle Creek. This was the heart and soul of the Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks Gardner elk late hunt, which was started in 1976, designed to reduce the number of elk in the northern herd. Sure. And that hunt went all the way up through 2009. And so you have basically this perfect storm of predation pressure from multiple carnivores, human hunting effects, which have been important here, and then you have your factors of such as severe winters and drought, which have had impacts on our elk herds as well. So the story of trophic cascades is not the simple story that has been often popularized, as the wolves have caused this whole landscape to change. Wolves are certainly part of the tipping point there, and maybe a necessary part of that story, but they aren't the only factor.
It's more complex.
It's more complex.
As you say, like you get into this idea where if I'm trying to defend the existence of wolves, or in this case, kind of like the manifestation of more wolf introductions in different states, I might take this idea of trophic cascade, boil it down,
and use it as my justification for the thing that I ultimately want. Conversely, I might argue if I want less wolves on a landscape,
more
that
elk.
they didn't, more elk, that they didn't play as big a role in the, and so that's the danger in all of this. And I'm sure as someone who lives this and breathes it every day, I'm sure it's a frustration, because I will say I've talked to several biologists that kind of cringe when you say trophic cascade, because I think they would probably say what you just kind of phrased as, it's like an oversimplification of this idea that can be applied to whatever narrative someone's trying to spin.
We have to embrace the controversy. We have to embrace the debate. That's what science is all about.
Yeah.
And that's our job as scientists is right now you have a number of competing voices out there that have worked in this ecosystem over the last couple decades to kind of tease apart what has occurred when it comes to that trophic cascade debate issue. And I think there's a lot we all agree on, and there's some that we disagree on. And actually, we have a forthcoming book. I'll do a little promotion of it right now, if that's okay. And that's University of Chicago Press. It's coming out in November. It's called Yellowstone Wolves, Science and Discovery in Our World's First National Park. And myself, Doug Smith, Dan McNulty were the editors, and we've brought together all these collaborators that have studied wolves here the last 25 years, different voices coming together to tell the story of Yellowstone wolves from our perspective, the people involved with it for the last 25 years. And one of the things we're very proud about in that book is we have a chapter on trophic cascades that is co-authored by many of the competing voices. We wrangled everyone together.
How dare you have competing narratives in the same?
And it was challenging, but I think in the end we hope that provides a great understanding to the public to understand that it is complex. There are different ideas, and that's the beauty of science. It's self-corrective. As we collect more data, as we study things longer term, we get we crystallize, and we'll never completely understand. We may never understand it fully, but we get closer to the truth, and that's kind of our goal here. And I think it's okay. We don't need to use wolves as the justification. We don't have to use a story like trophic cascades as a justification to have them back on the landscape. I mean, there's many reasons why wolves should be back on the landscape. Just their role as a predator in food webs, outside of the specific example of trophic cascade, it would be enough reason to restore them to many landscapes.
Do you feel that one thing I've always wondered is like say a grizzly bear, a mountain lion, a cougar, and a mountain lion, and a wolf. Say those three things that exist in this landscape that we're in right now. Do they all provide very similar ecosystem services? We know the predation part of it, but would you lump them all into one kind of service, or they're based on their habits, based on how they predate?
Sure.
Are there nuanced differences in what they provide to a landscape that may be a wolf versus a grizzly bear?
Sure, there's definitely nuanced differences. I mean, for example, bears are sleeping half the year, right?
Yeah.
So half the year, they're out of the picture.
For example.
Maybe a little bit of exaggeration, maybe a little less than half the year. But, as part of their natural history, they go into a state where they're not on the landscape. When you actually look at their role in elk herd dynamics, they are incredibly important. They are the leading cause from most studies that study multiple carnivore predation in elk systems. Doesn't matter if it's Yellowstone or other parts of the Rocky Mountain West. Grizzly bears and black bears combined are the primary predators on newborn elk calves. Much more so than wolves, much more so than cougars. I mean, granted, we just visited a cougar-killed elk calf, but that first month of an elk calf's life, its biggest concern is probably a bear. Wolves and cougars, less so, but still important. Then you look at a wolf and a cougar, they're on the landscape year-round. Yeah. And as that, just choose an elk calf story as an example. They're born into after running the gauntlet of bears and cougars and wolves. And then by fall, late summer, bears are less of a predatory role because calves can outrun them. And then you get into winter and bears are sleeping, and then wolves and cougars step up their role in elk calf predation and play an important role in elk calf recruitment into the herd. And so they play a slightly different role. You can also look at their hunting styles. We'll just choose cougars and wolves as those examples. Wolves are what we call coursing group hunters. Coursing meaning running. They get their prey to run. Their success as a hunter is really dependent on finding vulnerable prey, okay? And that means young, old, sick, weak, slower. And we can talk a little bit more about it. I think it's a really important thing to talk about, so I'll leave that off for a second. Cougars, in contrast, are ambush solitary hunters, and they tend to hunt more in steep forested terrain at night. Wolves tend to hunt more in the open valley bottoms, crepuscularly, dawn and dusk. And so the nuance there is that they are all hunting the same elk herd, but at different times and in different habitats.
places, yeah.
Okay, and so, but you pull back from that a little bit, and yes, I would say the ecosystem services they are similarly providing is through predation, through reducing high densities of the ungulate, their primary prey, and then how that then ripples through the food webs and nutrient recycling. And so in that sense, they all share that common denominator.
Yeah, that's kind of what, it's nice to hear it so simply put. They're gone for half the year because it does. Because when I think about this, and it goes to that trophic cascade discussion, it's such a dynamic situation where the application of predation is happening, different wavelengths, different times, different places. So I think that's good to understand.
So and just to kind of capstone that, I guess that idea that there was a wolf-triggered trophic cascade here in Yellowstone, those of us that have been studying the system for a long time would rather have people understand that it's a multi-carnivore, and you can include human hunters into this story. And here's why: is that part of the nuanced debate of what role carnivores have had is through the numerical effects on the elk. In other words, have the changes in woody browse. The popular story that you've heard is that these ungulates live in this landscape of fear, and they're avoiding these areas because they're worried about being killed. And as a result, you get willow or aspen regenerating. There is some little truth to that, and I can expand on that in a second.
Please.
But really what the prevalence of data suggests is there are behavioral effects on elk by carnivores. There is predation risk that plays a role, but it's probably largely been a numerical effect of the combined effects of carnivores that have influenced those vegetation communities by bringing down your ungulate densities.
Sure.
And bears, wolves, cougars, and human hunters have all been an important part of the story of how our northern herd has been reduced. And those different carnivores or the human effects have played different strengths through time. You could argue, our data shows nicely that in the first 7 or 8 years of wolf recovery, wolves played a relatively small role in the decline of elk. And that's a very common misunderstanding. It was assumed that if you look at your raw numbers, elk herd was over 20,000. 1995, 14 wolves were put on the landscape, and boom, your herd dropped. Well, 14 wolves had no effect on that drop. They really didn't. There's just too many elk and not enough wolves.
Yep.
There was a couple thousand elk being harvested. There were cougars operating. There were grizzly bears operating. Then you had severe winter of 96, 97, knocked that herd down. My first spring here in April 19, I'll never forget it. One of my first hikes I ever did when I moved out here from Vermont was in this April of 1997. I hiked where I can see the trail right across the valley here, hiked up the Black Canyon of the Yellowstone. It was April 27th. And I probably counted in that first 2-3 miles of that hike, 30 dead elk. They're just winter kill everywhere. And so winter has a big effect on these ungulates. And then you can look at summer productivity, and the drought of 2000 to 2007 here in this landscape affected forage quality, and that's incredibly important for calf recruitment and cow body condition for pregnancy and survival. So you've got a lot of things operating here, and that's why part of our role is to, when we talk about things like trophic cascades or what role do predators have, you have to put it into context of other factors.
And so to think about connecting that, and this is often the discussion with hunters, if the human element, as you say, so nicely fits with the wild predation element, how then would you connect the human management of the predators? Because I think that's really, if this was if we're going to be real corny and say the circle of life, how do you think of that in its application? Obviously not here in Yellowstone, but like in just in general, if this wasn't a national park and there was human hunting and wolf tags and tags, as which right up the valley there is.
Sure. This is a great question, and there's a lot of different thoughts on this, and obviously a lot of different philosophies on this, and Yellowstone is a great reference point to it, because we often hear from hunters or from even state game agencies, largely because of the perception of it, is that carnivores need to be managed. This idea that in order to protect deer and elk, you have to manage your carnivores, and depending on how you answer that question depends on your values, your societal view, maybe your cultural, political views. From a biological standpoint, it's very difficult to defend this idea that if you don't manage your carnivores, your system will collapse, you'll run out of food, the elk and deer won't be there anymore. Because one, let's just look at Yellowstone. We don't manage our carnivores here. Not to say they're not influenced by outside effects, because we have a transboundary population. Our wolves move out of the protection out onto this landscape here and are subject to legal hunting. It doesn't play a big role in our population by any means, but it can alter things slightly. But we have today and this can change, but we have today what we view as an incredibly dense and healthy carnivore population, and we have a very healthy elk population in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, despite all these carnivores. You pull back and you look at much of the Rocky Mountain West, and you look at elk herd, let's just choose elk for example, you look at elk herd objectives in many parts of the Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, and by far the vast majority of hunting districts, elk herds are at or above objective. And that is under a landscape now that has bears, wolves. And cougars everywhere. And now you could argue that, well, they're at objective or above objective in some of these areas because there is hunting, there is some illegal take, there's wildlife services that plays a role with livestock control when it comes to carnivores. And so I think, just to boil it down to a very simple thought process here.
Good luck.
I think you can have it all.
Yeah.
I really do. I believe that done properly, and you can give a lot of credit, I would say, to state agencies that are struggling with how you handle carnivore recovery. Of course, the major constituent would be people that might be more prone to being anti-carnivore, let's face it.
Sure.
And that a lot of that could be through misunderstanding, misperception, or culture, or background, or personal experience. But the state agencies are wrangling with, this is a contentious topic. How do we meet the desires and needs of our public, which is one segment of population, with other stakeholders, which are equally, I would argue, as important to the long-term success of conservation?
Here's a question I have in regards to that. I think about this quite often, and this may be a devil's advocate. For a hunting podcast, this might be playing the devil's advocate a little bit.
Yeah.
State game agencies. Funded up sometimes 60, 70%, maybe even more in some cases. But that's generally the number I've heard from American System of Conservation Funding, which includes license sales, Pittman-Robertson dollars, Dingell-Johnson dollars, all that stuff going in to fund these agencies. And so they have, you see R3 programs that are meant to get more hunters in there because they need those dollars. What does that do, in your opinion, to how those game agencies think about their constituencies?
Well, sure. I mean, I'm a Park Service biologist, and I don't want to come off, I'm also a Montana resident, and I believe strongly in the need for our state agencies to have the resources and tools to do the job they have to do to manage the public trust, the wildlife heritage that we all have. I think there's no doubt about it. There's a rich history predominantly of support through the hunting community, hunting sportsmen and women who have contributed financially and activism greatly to the success of wildlife conservation in our country, hands down. I think where we're entering is into a phase in our world now where we need to acknowledge that and celebrate that. But we also need to provide opportunities for other stakeholders to buy in. And we can look at the issue here, the very contentious, hotly debated issue of wolf conservation in the state of Montana, which I'm most familiar with. And you have seen in recent years the efforts of sort of non-consumptive stakeholders that maybe aren't even anti-wolf hunting as much as, hey, we want a voice too. Please provide us some opportunity for buy-in to this. We want a seat at the table. And if you look at the vision of the state agencies, is they'll say, we want all stakeholders to have a voice. I think what we're learning is that how do we transition to an industry, or not an industry, how do we transition from a culture of where it's largely been supported financially and logistically by sportsmen and women that are hunters and fishermen? How do we now expand that, which is a great need? I think we're at a real important tipping point where we would be well served to embrace all stakeholders who may have slightly different values and views on wildlife and how they be managed. They might not totally agree with one another, but they agree on many things, and they want a lot of the same things, and we need to capitalize on that energy. And I think we're seeing that more and more, right? I mean, my experience in my time out here in the Rocky Mountain West has seen that transition. We were talking earlier about organizations like Meat Eater
Yep.
or BHA, Backcountry
Yep.
Hunters and Anglers. And I think it's tapped into an energy and a resource of bringing people together that might be on slightly different sides of an issue.
Oh yeah, at
to
BHA
find
where
that
we were
common ground.
hanging out with Patagonia. Yvonne
Yeah.
Chenard shows up. We're like, "What's up, Yvonne?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm anti-predator hunting." We're like,
Yep.
okay.
Yep.
We're willing to tolerate
Yep.
that and talk about that
Mhm.
because we share this value for the
Yeah.
landscape.
Yeah.
That's a tough thing,
Yeah.
admittedly, I would say.
Yeah, oh, it is. And
It's seeing it. It's. I would say this is one of those issues where I'm like almost right on the cutting edge of it, right on the 50-50 split, because I want to say, I want all voices to come in. You got to have these competing ideals that are all grounded on valuing wildlife, right?
Yeah.
And you got to have these competing approaches to how to express that value and
Sure.
how to manage it. At the same time, you look at states like Colorado and even Oregon where, oops, we lost spring bear hunting.
Yeah.
Oops, we lost this. We lost hunting with dogs. Whoops, we lost. And so I can see both. I see the philosophical need for this, but I wonder, and again, I think that's what I'm here to try to do, and having you on is a big part of that, is to get people to understand how complex this is. And I think from a defending hunting standpoint, I always come to the table like, I want everybody to understand the value of this.
Yeah.
Even those that come into it, like you said, not necessarily anti-hunting, but more valuing the wildlife for what it is and not what it gives you.
Yeah, exactly. And, and I come back to the point I made before is I do think we can have a little bit of everything and maybe not all in one place. I mean, we've got a place like Yellowstone where carnivores are protected, ungulates are protected. Of course, they're transboundary. They migrate, they move over large areas. But we don't have many places like that. I mean, our study is probably one of the few studies worldwide of a wolf population that is not under some level of human exploitation.
Sure.
And even then we can't say that because each year we lose a couple wolves from packs primarily living in Yellowstone that spend that one day and they travel out onto a place like across the valley here and they're subject to illegal harvest or we get a legal take. And again, I come back to that point that we haven't shown or believed to have important population impacts on the park wolf packs, but can disrupt natural social structure, which our mission is to preserve. But when you go outside a protected preserve, there's very few places out there on the landscape where you have that full protection. And I think it'd be great if we had more of those. But I also think that there's places where you're not going to have carnivores or can't have carnivores, and then you're going to have all the places in between where you could have some level of sustainable carnivore hunting. Some would argue for that, and the populations would do okay and be resilient. I mean, these animals are incredibly resilient by nature, and that's why we see stable carnivore populations in many areas where they aren't over-harvested, and likewise, you would see stable ungulate herds in many of those same areas. So, I think if we work together more, different stakeholder groups, and come together and try to find compromise on both sides, that'll serve us very well in the end in terms of ultimately what we want, a lot of us, is to preserve wild nature.
Yeah, and I think as we talked about, I could say this because, I think in Dr. Valerius Geist would love to, he was texting me the other day about doing another podcast, and I was very excited to talk to him when we first talked. And again, he is, I'll say it personally, like he was very anti-wolf. When we spoke, he talked about predator pits. He talked about hydatid disease. I hope I always say that right. And he explained to me it was informed by a lot of things he had experienced in Russia with some wolves over there. And so his explaining of his worldview was kind of shaped that way.
Sure.
Your worldview, I'm sure, is in a lot of ways shaped to what you've seen here. And so again, I go back to when we slot in these charismatic megafauna into these very controversial, very emotional topics where everybody comes to it with a different perspective and a different worldview. You can come into these debates, right?
Yeah.
Where we're kind of talking past each other a little bit.
Sure. And I think, what a person like myself's job is here is to try to provide, the basic biological truth about how these systems work. And first of all, we have to fully admit we really don't understand nearly as much as people wish we did, and that's a very hard thing to explain to someone when what happened to the elk herd or what role did sometimes as you get into the details you have to say I don't know. But I think what we can say and what we've learned a lot from studying wolves in a place like Yellowstone or cougars is we've definitely added a more accurate understanding of predation and what role they play.
O'Reilly Auto Parts are in the business of keeping your car on the road. O'Reilly Auto Parts offer friendly, helpful service and the parts knowledge you need for all your maintenance and repairs. If you're confused about what part you need, like what wipers are going to be the best, what replacement headlights are going to be the best, go into O'Reilly and talk to the people that work there because they're great and they're super friendly and they'll get you squared away where you walk out knowing you got the right thing. They've got thousands of parts and accessories in stock, either in-store or online, so you never have to worry if you're in a jam. Do you need your windshield wipers replaced? You need a brake light fixed? You need some quick service? They'll help you find the right part or point you to the nearest local repair shop for help. The professional parts people at O'Reilly Auto Parts are your one-stop shop for all things auto do-it-yourself, and you can find what you need in-store or online. Stop by O'Reilly Auto Parts today or visit us at O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. That's O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today. You ever get that feeling you're stuck inside staring at screens and a primal urge kicks in? You crave wide open spaces, fresh air, the chance to connect with the land. Well, maybe it's time to find your own piece of the wild, but searching for property can be a maze. That's where Land.com comes in. They got millions of listings across the country, from mountain ranches to hidden fishing holes. Their search tools are like a seasoned guide helping you narrow down what you want. Land.com isn't just about buying and selling. It's about finding a place to hunt, fish, explore, or simply sit by a campfire and listen to the crickets. So head over to Land.com today to turn one day into today, because trust me, there's nothing quite like the feeling of standing on your own piece of earth.
I always try to come back to the biology and explain it. And I think, and I don't know if you want to talk about this now or have the conversation go.
We should talk more about the animals themselves. Because I generally, my mistake is always, I'm like, let's talk about the idea of wolves. But I think you have so much information on mountain lions and wolves and what they are and like what they really do. And again, I said this earlier. I think that's a big part of what I'd like to learn.
I think, what I really like talking about is wolf hunting behavior and cougar hunting behavior.
Who doesn't want to talk about that?
There's a lot of misperception out there. We sort of hold the wolf up on this pedestal as being sort of this mythological.
You think that's Liam Neeson's fault?
Yeah, maybe so.
Strapping?
I mean, we wrote about in our book sort of like we kind of equate wolf predation as sort of like to these sort of mythological forces like Moby Dick or tornadoes, of, having these just sort of, and you always hear the stories about how wolves did this and how wolves did that, and we've studied wolf hunting behavior for 25 years, and we've studied it by watching them do it, which is so rare in a predator study, maybe outside of Africa. And I personally have witnessed 50, 60, 70, you lose track of how many direct kills from beginning to end. Our teams have watched thousands of hours of wolves hunting elk and bison. And through that, and we've collected data and we've analyzed it, and we've really kind of pieced out of the complexity of that issue of really fundamentally how wolves hunt. And I think one of the biggest takeaway messages is that they're very much limited by their biology and their behavior to be good hunters. They are very challenged by hunting and getting their food. And And so let me just kind of go through a couple key aspects to their biology and their
I like
behavior.
that. Knock them down a few pegs.
Yeah. So, first of all, they're limited very much by their just physical biology. I mean, they are a sort of a jack of all trades sort of an animal. They have essentially their skeletal structure is such that their hunting and killing tools are primarily their teeth, right? Their jaw, what's in their mouth, and their endurance and ability to run and move the way they do. But because of that, it's very difficult for them to kill something 5 times their size. And when we look at a place like Yellowstone, about 90% of their prey is elk, okay? Their next most common food type is bison. And the majority of biomass they get from bison isn't from killing them directly, although they do hunt and kill bison. It is through scavenging on bison. And we've seen more and more of that in recent years, and I'll talk about that after. But so they're limited by their ability. They have to approach a prey animal. Let's say they approach a group of elk. They use their sense of smell, their great olfaction. They have okay eyesight. It's not great at night, pretty decent during the day. They have to find prey first. And then once they find prey, they have to engage with that prey. And that process involves watching. Then they start running. And by running, they try to figure out, okay, I'm approaching this group of elk. Which one is going to be the less risky to kill? They're very risk averse. They've evolved to be risk averse. It's very dangerous and difficult for them to run up to something. Think about it from your own perspective. If you were to run up to an elk and open your mouth and try to grab onto its hind quarter and pull it down, just think about how dangerous and physically difficult that would be. And that's and that's for an animal that on average is, males are about 125 pounds, females are about 110. So they have to do that, and they're, as a result, they're only successful doing that when they hunt adult elk about 15% or so of the time. So think about doing a task at work. Ben, geez, we'd like to see your performance step up a little bit. You're only at about 15% efficiency.
They tell me that all the time.
You wouldn't last long. So, these animals, just to get their meal, it's very difficult for them. So what they need is vulnerable prey. And vulnerability manifests itself in a number of ways. Young animals, like an elk calf, that's easy and not dangerous to pull down. An old, injured animal that's weak and easy for the wolves to grab and pull down, or something sick, or something stuck or trapped or in a terrain trap. Outside of that, by and far, the elk gets away. Most of the time. And when they do engage, they have to grab on, and they have a long rostrum, and as a result, and they have teeth running down that, they grab on with their incisors, and they use their canines to puncture and grab and restrain. And they're getting yanked and jerked and kicked, and they have to hold on, and their real benefit as a hunter is that they hunt in groups. And so it is by having at least one, several other animals come and help them and to overpower that animal that they might be fighting with to pull down to the ground. That is their most common prey in Yellowstone. Bison, you can imagine, it's even more difficult to pull down a bison. And so most often they fail when they attempt. Their encounters aren't successful by and far the majority of the time. And so that right from the get-go limits their ability to be a runaway predator. And that's why elk aren't wolf bait. Okay, yeah. They have the ability to handle predation risk on the landscape because, by and large, the majority of the time, any individual elk is going to survive their encounter with wolves. And so there's that one aspect. Unlike a cougar that has retractile claws. We call it, the word is supinating. I love that word. It's rotating wrists.
Do a hashtag. Hashtag
supinating. Cougars have supinating wrists, retractile claws, and really incredibly powerful forelimbs. They don't have the endurance of the wolf. They have short, quick bursts. They stalk. They're ambush hunters. They sneak up and pounce. Very different hunting style. And as a result, and we don't know this, we hope from Yellowstone to get this data because of the special GPS collars we're using, these accelerometer collars where we can measure and see hunting events and see how often they're successful from the surge in the data from the GPS collars. But we believe in general that most biologists studying cougars would argue that they probably have greater success per encounter with prey than do wolves. Okay, so they're very different in that hunting style. And so, again, back to the wolves, their success as a predators, they need vulnerable prey to be successful. So that's calves, that's old cows, bull elk in late winter or in the fall, if they've exhausted reserves from the rut, are more vulnerable. And so from the get-go, the wolves are by far at the disadvantage when they encounter elk. But obviously they're successful. They wouldn't survive if not. And they do that through group hunting. They do that through a division of labor. What we've learned in Yellowstone is that we know a lot about our packs and who the individuals are, their age, their sex. We can estimate their body weight because wolves follow sort of a body growth pattern that we have from all our hundreds of wolves we've weighed and measured and known their ages. So we can kind of understand the role of body size, sex, and age class. And what we've learned is that the best hunters in a wolf pack are the 2 to 3 year olds.
Okay.
Kind of that sort of combination of experience hunting, but sort of youthful vigor and body size. Males tend to have a higher probability of success than females. Of course, they hunt together, so sometimes you have to tease that out. You typically find those 2 to 3 year old younger wolves on average being the fleeter of foot, the faster. They select out the one. They grab and restrain, and then the large dominant breeding male or the older adult males will come up and use their larger body mass, that weight, to help pull that animal down. So it really is a division of labor. We also see an age effect. Just as the younger wolves are the better hunters, the pups are just kind of learning. The first year of their life, they're not great hunters. We also find what we call predatory senescence. As about age 5 or 6, wolves have a very short life history. They don't live that long. Average lifespan is about 5. So they're not a long-lived carnivore, less so than cougars, which on average live, a dozen or so years.
Mm-hmm.
And what we see is that their participation in a hunt, their ability to be successful at capture and takedown starts declining after about age 5 or 6. And we see that changing of aging. Humans go through that too at a slightly different scale. Any mammal does. And that predatory senescence. And we've actually looked at their blood profile. We've looked at physiological responses where you can look at the effects of aging on wolf behavior. And it's very clear cut. They age quickly and then they're just not as effective as doing what they do. So that has implications for impacts on elk. If you've got a wolf population that is constantly being hunted and managed and knocked down, you're going to have a younger age class. They're the kind of the best hunters of the population. And so a place like Yellowstone, we see more age classes, and that in the end we believe has an effect on their impacts overall on elk. It might be subtle, but we think it's a real effect. And so you've got those different aspects of their biology that really shows their limits to success. Yeah. We see seasonal effects on vulnerability, of course. Summertime, elk calf neonates, the newborns are very vulnerable to predation, but their mother is not. Adult cow elk in Yellowstone is largely invincible to wolf predation from the ages of 2 to about 12, and unless she gets herself in a pickle and makes a bad choice or gets in a wrong spot. But by and large, those wolves don't kill those elk. In fact, our data for 25 years has flat curve. Average age of a cow elk kill in northern Yellowstone is 14. Wow. And that has not changed in 25 years. Yes, they kill prime age cows occasionally. Yes, they kill a 25-year-old cow. We've had 25-year-old cows in Yellowstone. We just had a collared cow elk that died this winter at 25 and a half years old. Think about that. Yeah. A cow elk that was born in 94, the summer before wolves showed up, that
probably
lived her whole life.
Voted for Bill Clinton.
Survived her whole life through a gauntlet of carnivores, pumped out a bunch of calves. Many of those didn't make it, were killed by carnivores perhaps, or other factors that calves die from, but lived her entire life on this landscape of carnivores, and in the end was killed by a pack of wolves at 25 and a half years old.
There's so much here. As I listen to all, as you just kind of dump this information, and there's such a wealth of experience, I'm here trying to make some connective points, and I'm sure a lot of listeners are doing the same thing. And as I listen to you talk about the ineffective predation of wolves and what they're able to do, it fits into the kind of this ecological idea that they are kind of literally eating at the edges of a population.
Sure.
It's
a good way to put it, yeah.
I'm just trying to articulate the best I can. The core population is not immune, but largely immune to this predation, which allows both of these things to exist at the same time.
Yes.
In what might sound like a hyperbole, but is some harmonic, relationship.
Yeah. And the important part of the link there to make is this: for an elk herd to grow or maintain a certain population size, you have to have two main things: adult cow survival and calf recruitment. Okay. Bull elk are important to us as hunters, right? I mean, that's often the target for many, not all. Many of us prefer to get a cow for meat, but you can't deny the significance of bull elk in a population, of course, but for an elk herd itself, its dynamic is largely driven by adult cow survival and elk calf recruitment. And so the reason we have what we see as a robust elk herd in this landscape, despite this high abundance of carnivores, is that if you just look at the wolf's impact, is their biggest role on the trajectory of our elk herd is through killing elk calves, which impacts how many individuals are recruited into that herd and how long a cow elk survives. And the longer she survives through those prime year ages, the more calves she cranks out. What we find here is high pregnancy rates of our cow elk in Yellowstone, 90% or more, but of prime age cows are pregnant each year. They're cranking out calves each year. At about age 12, 13, you start seeing what we call reproductive senescence, where pregnancy rates start declining, and the data is very strong in this, and they probably stop producing calves every year and start alternating, and then probably stop producing calves altogether. So the fact that the average age of a cow elk kill in Yellowstone northern herd is a 14-year-old cow, she's at that point where she is less important to herd dynamics than the prime age cow. Yeah. The average age, and I don't make this to pit hunters, human hunters versus wolves, but just to the data, just to explain the data. During the Gardner Lake hunt, there was all this great data collected by the Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and the average age of the cow elk harvested during the Gardner Lake hunt all those years was about 6. That's a prime age cow, incredibly important to elk calf recruitment. So when you look at the reason that wolves haven't caused this elk herd to crash is that there's still enough cows each year that are surviving from year 1 to year 2, putting out a calf. Now, 50 to 75% of those calves aren't going to make it till adulthood. They're going to get killed by carnivores. They're going to die from weather, disease, drowning, you name it, all factors. But as long as enough of those calves survive, you can have a stable herd or growing. So that helps put that perspective of the limits of wolf hunting's ability into perspective. That's why you can have a stable elk herd and still have a fair bit of wolf predation. It depends on which elk they're killing. And as we know, a few bulls can breed a lot of cows. Yeah. So yes, wolves are going to kill mature bull elk. Again, their success at killing bull elk is largely driven by seasonal vulnerability, late winter. Now let's remember, bull elk have weapons. And this is another great finding we had from Yellowstone. We did this really neat study on wolves in late winter in March when elk transitioned from antlered to dropping their antlers. This was a really fascinating study led by one of our long-term researchers, Matt Metz. He's finishing his doctoral degree at University of Montana. Took the initiative years ago to start collecting this observation data during our winter studies, where the data we started collecting was looking at when wolves attack bull elk groups, do they select the pedestal bulls or the ones wearing antlers? And we found that there was significantly greater selection for pedestal bulls than antlered bulls. The ironic part of this story is that we think of wolves needing vulnerable prey to be successful, and when you look at the bulls that drop their antlers first, they are in better condition. Yeah. Bull antler growth and bull reproductive success, as we all know, is driven by antler size. It is the primary selective force is sexual selection with antlers and ungulates. But secondarily, we believe they've served as a predatory defense. And in Yellowstone, we were able to demonstrate that, whereas that wolves would, given the choice, which makes sense, go for the one that wasn't wearing the antlers. And ironically, they were the bulls in better condition. But the trade-off there was that from a wolf's perspective, I'm less likely to get gored, because we see bulls do this. They stand their ground, they put their antlers down. We've had wolves die from getting gored from elk, from bison. So we know it is a real risk to them. And we have this really sweet data set that demonstrated that antler retention in elk is probably being driven by wolf predation over the thousands of years, because they are the primary prey in many of these systems where there's wolves and elk for thousands of years. And things like mule deer, white-tailed deer, moose drop much earlier in the winter. Not that they aren't prey to wolves, they certainly are, but if elk are the primary prey, it probably was a selective pressure in part for retaining antlers for longer, because if you have your antlers on your head, you're less likely to be killed by wolves.
Now, are they growing them back earlier as well? Does that make sense? Or are they being hunted less by wolves at that time because of elk?
So,
because the calves.
So I don't know about if they're going back earlier or not. They are obviously antler growth is starting immediately once they're shed.
Yeah.
And that nutrient, that blood vessels start pumping in, and that's of course antler being one of the fastest growing tissues in the animal kingdom. And but of course the sooner you start growing, the bigger your antlers can get. So there is again probably driven by sexual selection to drop early. And if you drop early, you'll grow bigger, and that theoretically will enhance your reproductive success in the fall. But wolves have inserted themselves into that story a little bit, we believe, through evolutionary history. So that's another really cool part of it. So, all in all, kind of what I just went through is sort of demonstrating that wolves need vulnerable prey to be successful by and large. And there are limits to their ability as a hunter, and that is why you are unlikely to have, in most places, sort of a runaway predation, a sort of wiping out of an ungulate herd.
Predator pit.
They're just not able to do it.
Yeah.
They just are not capable of doing it.
Yeah, and I think as I sit here too, and I'm thinking about, the totality of all the conversations I've had, this is episode 135 or so. I had a conversation with a guy named Dusan Smetana who lives in Bozeman. He's a photographer, but originally came from Czechoslovakia. And over there, they had a traditional idea that the hunter was revered in the community because of his knowledge, because of his responsibility to have a knowledge of the ecosystem, to know which animals need to be plucked off the landscape, to know what the predation was happening, to really understand and provide value to their community from their understanding of what they had to do to maintain these healthy populations as a hunter. And this was kind of a traditional, forget the term that he used, that was a Czech term. But it was interesting to hear him say that. And it's interesting to hear this information that not many hunters really know, and not many biologists are able to suss out and study.
Mm-hmm.
So as a hunter, you understand, okay, this is what wolves are doing to these herds, regardless of what I can do with this tag. It's interesting to me to then, that greater understanding is kind of the responsibility of a hunter in the modern sense, to understand what are all the dynamics here. If I have a cow tag and I have a bull tag, what do I do with those things?
Yeah, I mean, those of us that spend time hunting elk, it is hard to do, right? Yeah. And we have tools, much more so than wolves. So, many people like myself, a bird in the hand, here's my chance, and you can't be selective, and you aren't selective, and other people either might be a better hunter or be able to hunt have more time to hunt, or be able to hunt in a place that they've really learned the patterns and can be more selective, and they might decide no, I really want to go for this sort of an animal this year. But
you would imagine if graduate level hunting, if you start out, there's these philosophies that hunters go through stages. Being that hunters if you started as a hunter when you were a child, you go through these stages, right? Well, I imagine that even my own, I'm sure your evolution as a hunter, mine as well, you go through these stages of understanding and appreciation and value, and you would hope that you'd be able to, listening to this, everybody that is out there learning to hunt or is brand new, that this is something that has value beyond just the understanding of wolves. It has value to your to your role here, to what you can do and what you can't do based on what other predation factors exist.
And I would encourage anyone that is passionate about the landscape they hunt on to learn about the local ecosystem there. Talk to your local biologists that spend a lot of time on the ground. I mean, I don't want to demean or diminish the experience that hunters have. I mean, let's face it, when you have boots on the ground, you spend time out there, you inherently learn and pick up a lot of things about the landscape and the animals, and that knowledge is irreplaceable to any scientist data point, to any, so you embrace that, but also take advantage to, I encourage people to really learn about what's happening in that particular hunt unit they're going into. What are our wolf populations like? What are our cougar populations like? What role may they have? Are bears, cougars, and wolves all playing a role at different times of the year? What is my role as a human hunter as part of that story too? What did the habitat do this year? What was the winter like? What was the summer precip like? And in not being so quick to jump to that one convenient scapegoat of why you may not have filled your tag. Well, and I hear this all the time. Well, I was in this area and all I saw were wolf and cougar tracks. So, there's no good. It's not good hunting. I mean, I've been hunting here in the Gardner Basin for the last 20 years, and every day where I hunt, that one of the most things I enjoy the most is coming across that cougar wolf track.
Yeah.
And I just know that there's also elk and deer out there as well, because that's why they're there. And trying to understand how all those different pieces fit together. Now, I'm not trying to paint this picture to say wolves don't have an effect, they don't impact elk. They certainly do, and that's part of the story of Yellowstone is that they reduced the elk herd. You could say in the years where we didn't have carnivores, and even the Gardner lay hunt could only do so much to reduce the hunt. And what you had is a elk herd that was probably, we know this, we've got good data on this, of density dependence, we call it. When you have high density ungulate herds, you tend to have a poorer body condition, more competition for available food. You tend to have bigger effects of winter die-offs. In a system absent of top predators and natural predators, you tend to have more large-scale variation in your booms and your busts and your crashes. And when you have a system where your top predators are in place, it dampens that. And so if you look at the elk herd in Yellowstone since the 1920s when the first counts really started, you see in the absence of carnivores, carnivores are removed from this landscape, and let's just use the northern herd as an example. That elk herd started climbing in high numbers. By the 1925, the last cougars were thought to have killed, the last wolves were thought to have been killed in the park. You saw that northern range elk herd starting to climb, and then the park stepped in and said, well, wait, we need to start doing something. Even Teddy Roosevelt, when he was here in the early 1900s, recognized that he had all these starving elk. What did the park do? They started feeding alfalfa. They started translocating and culling. Do the listeners realize, this is a really great part of Yellowstone's story, about 15,000 elk over the years between the 1920s and mid-1960s, about 15,000 elk were translocated from Yellowstone National Park as the source population for elk throughout not just the United States, but Canada, Argentina, places where you see elk now and most places link back to Yellowstone. And so the park was involved in heavy management of our elk herds, culling, shooting, translocations, and then it became out of public favor, and the Park Service went into, in the 60s, this idea of natural regulation. Let's stop the culling, let's stop the translocation, let's step back, let's go into natural regulation, see what happens. Well, then what happened is we still didn't have carnivores. Boom, that elk herd just started climbing. And I'm just talking about the northern herd. There are other elk herds that use Yellowstone as well, and I'm sure many of them went through similar changes. The northern herd is our best studied herd long term. And we had that herd get incredibly high abundance, high densities, and we saw, on average, probably body condition, pregnancy rates go down, more competition. And so what we have today is, there's no doubt about it, and for the foreseeable future, the days of 20,000 elk in the northern herd are gone. That has cultural significance, of course, but from a biological standpoint, we have what we believe is a incredibly healthy, stable, robust elk herd. Right now, our population estimation is about 7,000 to 8,000 elk. We count elk every year by doing a one day. You go up in an airplane, you count as many elk as you see on the landscape in one day from multiple planes. It is a very imprecise technique. So everyone kind of hangs their hat on, like, this year there are 3,492 elk in Yellowstone in the northern herd. Well, it's a minimum estimate. It's a count, and what we do is we apply tools that biologists use called a sitability correction factor, where you are only counting a minimum number of the elk. Your probability of counting 100% is always going to be less than 100%. And so you are basically trying to understand, okay, here's our count. What is our sitability? And so this last year, about 6,000 elk were counted during that one day count, and that includes the elk that are wintering north of the park up towards Dome Mountain in Paradise Valley. And what that translates into, based on our sitability index, is closer to a herd size of about 8,000. Okay. So, and our herd has the decline is stabilized. Some years we have good counts, some year we have bad counts. So when you try to correct for those imprecise counting methods of the airplane counts, we have a herd that is stable and, if not, slightly increasing. What does the future hold? We don't know. What is going to be the role of chronic wasting disease?
Yeah.
We believe carnivores might play an important role in there. That's yet to be determined. Yellowstone will be a great place to study that should it show up here. What's going to be the effect of climate change, of future droughts, of future winter severities? We'll wrangle with this for decades to come. But I think we are starting to hone in a little bit more closely on teasing out what the role of wolves are, what the role of cougars are, what the role of bears are, what the role of human hunting is, and if we continue with get a lot of stakeholder involvement of different walks of life and values and views, we will be best served to keep this research going on into the future. And we hope that helps better understand how we manage our elk herds, how we manage carnivores, what level of hunting can be at play, and we have to remember that we got to be cautious of not to apply everything we're finding about Yellowstone to other parts of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem and then beyond. For example, it would be hard to argue that you will see strong trophic cascade effects in many parts of the Rocky Mountain West where carnivores are restored, just because humans still play such a large role in both carnivores and ungulates. And so, even in Yellowstone, where humans are largely out of the picture, we still wrangle with what the relative effects are on that particular issue.
Yep.
So we can't expect to see strong effects outside of a place where, carnivore levels, probably densities are being kept lower because of human management. So anyway,
that's a huge part of it too. And I think as you kind of walking through this, you're answering all my questions before I have them. So I think, a lot of this is to go a little bit back to, this is ever evolving.
Mm-hmm.
The knowledge base is ever evolving. And so there isn't ever going to be one answer.
No.
So I think the next thing everybody is wondering, you just touched on it a little bit, is what's the future of all this as we use this landscape that we're looking at right now, this vast Serengeti that we're looking at that has enjoyed, this reintroduction of wolves and being able to kind of see it like you do. Then you think of the future of wildlife management. We have ballot box biology going on in Colorado right now, where they want to put a referendum to introduce wolves. You have this greater Yellowstone ecosystem situation with the grizzly bear population, where the argument is less like should the grizzly bears be there, and can hunting play a role in managing them. So there's an argument there, just to maybe crystallize it, and correct me if I'm off here. The argument for keeping them on the endangered species list is if you kill a certain number of them, they may not be able to be feeder populations for other very important grizzly bear populations outside of this ecosystem.
Sure, yeah.
So that you have these little pockets of debate that I'm sure will continue, but over time, I imagine the battle to protect these animals, to hunt them, to include them, to not include them, is going to only intensify as we experiment.
It's quite sobering. I mean, because there's so many things out of our control. I mean, we can talk about management and what actions can managers play, whether it be in a national park with a more hands-off approach to a state agency that is challenged with managing a variety of species into one landscape. But the things that we can't control, I mean, look what our country's going through right now with COVID, the unforeseen effects of a disease outbreak in our wildlife populations, the unforeseen impacts of climate change. And so we can look at the debate of what we should do with the grizzly bear and, can it sustain hunting? And ultimately it comes down to is, bears will be removed because of the challenges of coexisting with them on a human-dominated landscape, and what's the best way to manage that. And I'm not going to enter into a grizzly bear discussion necessarily, but just the discussion revolves around how many bears can die, and can we still have a sustainable, healthy population, as well as the potential to be connected, which is a very important part of so many species, large-scale biology, is are they connected to other populations. And I think we can kind of whittle it right down to the basic question of what are we willing to lose? Are we willing to lose grizzly bears from our landscapes because we jumped the gun on something, or are we Or maybe we wouldn't lose it, and let's have that discussion too. Maybe there is hunting of bears, and then we can still have all of what we want. We can have a population that's healthy and robust. We can still have some connectivity, and that'll come up with some creative ways of having tolerance and allowing bears to move across the landscape in these areas. In these areas, we're going to be less tolerant. Those aren't biological questions. No. Those are social questions, political questions, societal value questions.
And that's why, sitting here with you and trying to, like I said, I come at this with a certain idea. And that when I think about grizzly bears or even wolves, I think about the North American model of wildlife conservation. One of the tenets is that we're going to use science and wildlife biology to kind of meter this all out. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be the foundational level of how we go about what can we take off the landscape, what can we, what is approachable in terms of both carnivores and ungulates and all game species, and what we say is a game species and what's not.
Yeah.
And then you look at like the history of it, and I want to say this, and this is when I think about that model of conservation, I want to say that the application of those ideas, those tenets, however they may change over time, and I would argue that some of them need to.
Yes.
Need to be updated.
Yes.
But however they change over time, the application of this value system, however it will, morph, the core tenets have been good for elk. Mm-hmm. They've been good for turkeys. Yep. They've been good for deer. And so the application of those same ideas to carnivores seems to me to be logical. Now, that's the starting point for my thought process. And then talking to you, what I'm trying to do is, knock holes in that and understand where that maybe isn't an apples to apples comparison.
Yeah.
And given where we are as a society, it's not as easy as that, I know.
Yeah. Well, if we just look at the history of carnivore recovery here, it hasn't been the North American model that has saved them. What saved them is the Endangered Species Act, right? Yeah. And then we can point to other things like the Clean Air and Water Act. I mean, having healthy ecosystems, having protections where they weren't being hunted, that's what was good for carnivores. Now, whether that like shapes their future is a different question.
Because like the graduation element of that, right?
And I think that's where you kind of alluded to this. There's some papers that have been published, more of a philosophical approach to the North American model of conservation, why it's flawed, why it needs to change. There's some great stuff out there. And I think those arguments have indicated and tried to help people understand that yes, that model has worked really well for so many species and is still a great baseline for many agencies to operate under who are charged with that public trust of wildlife. But let's not forget the significant role of other things outside of that model that have been a key role of conservation. That kind of comes back to this idea you and I were talking about before is, should other stakeholders get buy-in in helping make decisions? And that's where I do think we have an opportunity to modernize, and we are in many ways, modernizing how we move forward with managing wildlife. And I think with that will come tough conversations between people of different views about hunting to come together and say, okay, I don't agree with carnivore hunting, or I do agree with it, or I think it should be done this way or shouldn't be done at all. Those are very challenging discussions to have to get everyone at the table, but they're necessary ones. And I think they won't be easy, and there aren't obvious answers, but the discussions have to happen, and people need to come to the table willing to give up something, but also fight for something that they think is important.
Sure, and I think that's a huge part of this conversation too, because I come to this not as a person, I've said this in the past, not as a person who desires to shoot a wolf. I don't desire to shoot a grizzly bear. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily, I kind of desire to shoot a mountain lion because I can eat it, and it's pretty tasty. I've had it many times, never killed one, but I've eaten it many, many times. And so as my value system kind of shifts through these ideas, it's not that I have a desire to hunt wolves. I have a desire to come to a place where both societally, politically, and biologically, we can all make it the right decision based on the right evidence. As we know, it's every biological decision here is imperfect because we don't know enough. We never will.
Right.
And so that's how I think of it. I'm not saying, God damn it, I want to be able to, my kids to hunt wolves and my kids to hunt grizzly bears. They got to be able to do that, and I'm going to fight for that. Mm-hmm. I want the hunting, because I think this ultimately what gets hunters and me as somebody who really cares about the community further along anyway. Yeah. If we're able to independently prove, rather what I want or don't want. If you as a biologist can independently prove hunting applied in this fashion is a positive, a long-lasting positive, it's better for me.
Sure.
Because it's a more sound way to make that decision.
Yeah.
And so that's where I love the idea.
And I do think the limit we have is with science is that it provides a pathway to a certain point. It provides factual information about how a system might be operating with predator and prey, for example. But it reaches a point where beyond that, it can no longer provide the guidance.
Yep.
And that's why it is only one part of the tenet of the North American model, based on scientific data. And you could argue that it's not applied as much as it should. But you can argue that in many cases it is applied as it is necessary to apply and adequately enough so. And it does come down to what does society want? What do we choose to do? And then your argument to use science to defend for a certain action kind of goes to the side. And so we just have to be cognizant of the fact that the job of science is to just provide an understanding, a better understanding that then provides sort of a benchmark by which someone, then a society, can decide and come together. What are our values? What do we want to see? Some believe, I believe this as well, that it would be nice to see, and again, this comes down to, I think, the misperception about how carnivores are on the landscape, wolves and cougars. And you often hear, you see this all the time in social media posts, even some prominent celebrity hunters that, I have a lot of respect for. You see the comments where, they show a picture of them with a dead wolf or a dead cougar, and it's overridden with comments like, one less deer killer, like doing your part. And it would be nice to see a greater segment of the hunting community come to appreciate the carnivore's role and their importance in being on the landscape.
Sure.
And I think you are seeing that.
I've heard it.
I think more and more we are learning that we've now lived in this greater Yellowstone ecosystem for a quarter of a century with an intact, robust carnivore population, and the sun rises every day, and we still get our elk tags filled and have wonderful experience on the landscape. And again, I think we can have a little bit of everything.
Yeah, and I think we've had Dan Flores on. I'm familiar with Dan.
Great. Oh yeah, I love his stuff.
He talks about coyotes in much the same fashion. And again, like, nature abhors a vacuum.
Yeah.
And so this carnivorous need, this trophic need to kind of to balance it, an ecosystem in that way, is always there for me. And I think if anybody cares what I have to say, the way I try to think, and I've evolved as a hunter, and I would articulate what's your job as a hunter? What do you think is the value you provide personally? Or what's the philosophy that you move through the world with when you're out looking for an animal? And increasingly I think of I'm here for ecological health. I'm here I need to understand biodiversity. I need to understand predation. I need to understand all these things, because if I can be an agent for the health of this ecosystem that I live in and care so much about, there'll be so many other things that are benefits from that maybe I'm not going to see if I don't care about the entire picture. If I'm just I'm going to go where that elk lives, I'm going to shoot it, I'm going to eat it, I'm going to celebrate the meat itself, I'm going to celebrate essentially the game-like quality of hunting, the adventure, the challenge,
the tribal camaraderie with your friends,
all those parts are all things that I can use to kind of paint the picture. But when it comes down to what is my purpose to the world for hunting, and I also often think people are asking, anti-hunters and non-hunters are asking, why is hunting good for society?
Right.
Or you can even take society off. Why is hunting good?
Right.
And if you can answer that question, me as a hunter, I care about the health of an ecosystem. And if every hunter kind of started to adopt this thinking, then we would have a bunch of agents of these ecosystems going out and trying to understand it.
I think we would have more of what more of what we all really enjoy as a hunter, being out there on the landscape. We'd have that in more places, and understanding that the choices we make as a hunter ripple throughout. I mean, I think about how many few beef cattle I've eaten over the last. And it's not. Don't get me wrong. I love beef. But I just think of that small part of the last 20 years of my diet, and my connection to my food that as a hunter that has linked me to wanting to have a landscape like this, but also wanting to see that wolf and cougar track out there.
Oh, it's so great.
And you know, so it goes beyond all those really important things that I also identify with that you just listed off of, you know, why you hunt and why it's important to you. And it goes beyond that. I mean, and we all make choices every day in life to do things, whether it's to own a phone, drive a car, buy meat from a store, hunt meat from the land, don't eat meat at all.
Yeah.
And they all are easy to justify from your perspective, but they can all have reasons to argue against too. And so,
yeah,
I mean,
nothing's simple, especially out here.
No, not at all. And so, yeah, I mean, where does that leave us? It leaves us with this idea that, from my perspective, if the better we understand how the role of predation fits on these landscapes from natural carnivores, those of us that are hunters who can appreciate and identify and maybe truly admire that element of those carnivores because there's something in that we are either jealous of or or enamored with or admire. The better we understand that and those truths, I think the better we will fit in as humans on that same landscape and have more of those landscapes.
Yeah, and as we continue, like, these conversations are important to unpack these things and continue to run at these hard issues and say, like, I'm going to, instead of avoiding this, because I would tell you, I'm not going to go out there and shoot a wolf, so what do I care?
Right.
But having the kind of worldview where you're like, I want to kind of tackle these tougher issues because they do inform the rest of the thing I love to do. And then not, again, I come back to this, I'll continue to. I like to challenge my own. I think the most interesting conversations are one that challenge your own assumptions or your own bubble think or your like the assumptions of all the people around you that tell you that, in this case, wolves are bad.
Yep.
Wolves are bad. And I agree with you. I've seen a lot of hunters in my purview say, like, the grip and groom with the wolf is to say, like, you're welcome. We did it. We did it together. There's 3 more elk. You're like, maybe, but all that does is bolster the argument of the anti-hunter who says you're just out there because you're killing wolves because you want more deer. You're not doing that for conservation, wildlife management.
And I've always struggled with the idea, and this is my, I think any hunter can relate to this, that internal debate of, killing an animal, taking life of an animal. When you come to that choice of the hunt, when you do that, it's always that internal struggle for many, myself included. And but and you had this such a deep admiration and sense of wanting to make sure that these animals are out there on the landscape. I'm always sort of struck by how many people have a hatred for a wild animal. I mean, I guess I've just never experienced that or can't comprehend that, of how you can love one sort of animal, then see another and have an actual hatred in your heart for it. I struggle with that and trying to understand where that comes from. And
it's deep-seated, right?
It is deep-seated. And, because, someone could argue to me, well, you kill an elk, you must not like them, or you must be okay with just taking the life. And, it could be further from the truth, and that's always hard to defend to someone that hasn't gone through that or haven't had that experience. But it is interesting that there are some people that feel hatred in their hearts towards a wild animal that's just out there doing its thing.
Well, the thing that you do for a job,
years,
the thing you do for a job, there's people that have unhealthy admiration and love for wolves.
And
totally skip over. Here's the dichotomy I think is worth talking about. There's a lot of people on the environmentalist protectionist side that have this overwhelming love for these animals and anthropomorphize them and make them out to be something they're not. And then conversely to that, you have hunters or some of my friends where, like, nature is metal, where they're like, wait. Look how awful they are, or look at how bloodthirsty they are, or look at what they really do. I mean, you think you love an animal that would rip an elk out of, the birthing canal of a cow and eat it alive, essentially. You love that? I hate that because it's doing that to an animal that I hunt. Somewhere in the middle of that is the truth, right? Somewhere in the middle of that is the truth. And understanding the animal, which you help people with just in this conversation, is a beginning of not having either of those unhealthy views.
And that's what happens when we apply human emotion and judgment and value onto the lives of wild animals. I mean, wolves, simply put, are not good or bad. They do what they do because they've been doing it for thousands of years, and that's how they've been successful. And as soon as we come in there with some judgment of this is good or this is bad, that's when the human perspective will drive how we then choose to live or not live with these animals. So
I'm with you.
But I do think as we look at what we almost lost for our wildlife heritage, habitat, landscapes, and what we're losing every day. If we can remind ourselves when we get a place like a Yellowstone of that, wouldn't it be great to have more of this, or this is what it used to be in many places, and appreciate that and learn from that, and maybe apply that to reaching out beyond the boundary of a protected preserve like Yellowstone and going onto, for example, our public lands where, I look across here, across the boundary of Yellowstone National Park and the Custer-Gallatin Forest up there, and I can see the very spot this fall where I was fortunate enough during our archery season to get a magnificent, beautiful bull in my backyard on public land. And it was this very emotional thing for me to look down on this landscape. I've spent my career as a biologist, look around, someone that's passionate about hunting, feeding my family, being part of that community as well, and having it all pulled together and just feel how lucky that I'm living in a time when I can experience all this in one place, because there's so many places where that's not even possible anymore.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And if in humanity, and hundreds of years from now, we move past this thing that you and I like to do, then at least we were here. At least we were the last vestige of enjoying it the
someday
way
Someday there'll be the young kids, instead of dreaming about the Pleistocene, they'll be dreaming about well, maybe not 2020, but
remember back in
we got to get through 2020.
Remember back in 95? Yeah, they won't be dreaming about 2020. Remember back in the Clinton era? Well, thanks, man. I really appreciate it. Plug your book one more time and tell people when it's coming out and where they can get it.
So we have a book coming out called Yellowstone Wolves, Science and Discovery in Our World's First National Park, University of Chicago Press. It was a 5-year effort to pull together 25 years summary of synthesizing the story of wolves back in Yellowstone. There's we've tried to write the book so it's very accessible to the lay audience. We've synthesized the science, referenced our peer-reviewed science publications, but tried to do storytelling. Storytelling is at the heart of so much of what our human cultures do, and the value and importance. And as scientists, we need to tell our story, tell the wolf story. And we have the book really encompasses everything from predator-prey, genetics, disease, the history of bringing wolves back, the human wolf dimension. We even have a wonderful chapter describing sort of the challenges and of transboundary management of wolves across park and public lands outside of park, bringing a lot of different voices together, men and women that have been involved with the story of Yellowstone wolves. We're very proud of it. We hope a lot of people get their hands on it. It's will be available in November. A very affordable book, a whopping $35.
Hey.
And we're excited for people to hear the story.
Yeah, me too. I'm glad to be. I guess we could be like signing off from a ridge in the Yellowstone Serengeti. But thanks for taking me out here.
Thanks,
Thank
Ben.
you for
It's a
including
pleasure.
me in
Yeah.
what you do every
Let's do it
day.
again.
As I tell my wife, I'm going to try to. If a podcasting thing don't work out, I'm going to go back to school.
All right. Well, we'll take you on as a technician next winter. So.
All right, man. Thanks, Dan.
All right. Thanks, Ben.
Bye.
Bye.
That's it. That's all. Another episode of THC in the books. Thank you to Dr. Dan Staylor. Thank you to everybody at Yellowstone National Park for doing what you do and providing the great outlet for us to have these discussions. They're very important. And we will continue to track grizzly bears in Wyoming, the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, continue to track wolves in Colorado, and wolves and grizzly bears and everything else here where we live in Montana and across the Rocky Mountain region. But it was fun, man. That was one of my favorite conversations. So hopefully you guys got out of it what I did, which is simply that predators, apex predators, charismatic megafauna, however you want to call them, have a place in our culture for a reason. Right, Phil?
That's right.
That's it. That's all you had to say.
That's all I have to say.
Well, it's a long one, so we're going to keep it short. Again, thanks to everybody for sending in your videos, your poems, everything for the Great American Outdoors contest. Make sure you go call the switchboard, call your representative. Time's running out. This is important. And once we get across the line, we can all celebrate together with a nice White Claw. And by the by, Phil, have you had the pure White Claw? The unflavored White Claw?
No. That's one I haven't had. They also have these lower calorie ones that come in different flavors that I haven't had. The 70 cal ones.
Yeah. They got pineapple. They got clementine.
Yeah, I haven't had those. Are those good?
Clementine's good. Pineapple's all right.
Pineapple sounds good.
The pure one is dog shit.
Well, sure. It's just like a sparkling water that
even
if
a
little
one
kick,
day,
right?
Even if one day, which this may never happen, if White Claw sponsors the show, we're not going to do ads for pure.
Oh,
because
okay.
I drink my White Claw because I want to argue with you about the flavors.
Sure.
And if there's no flavor, then what can we argue about? There's nothing to argue.
I think I would argue pure is a flavor. And I would say you're not.
Whoa, what?
I would say you're not in any position to be making.
Are you arguing that no flavor is a flavor?
Yes, you're not in a position to be making demands about your non-existent White Claw ad campaign.
I'm saying if they eventually come around, they're going to want to get on board. They'll pay me, and they'll be like, "It's a full-on." I probably won't. And calling it pure, what's more pure about it? You didn't put the flavor in it. Does that make it pure?
What should it be called?
I don't know. It should be called nothing.
Meh.
What's the flavor?
White
nothing.
Claw.
Nothing.
Yeah, okay.
Seltzer water. Like, come on, man. White Claw. Pure. My ass. All right, we'll see you next week. Bye.
Too long, 'cause I can't go a week without doing wrong. Oh, without doing wrong.
You ever get that feeling the walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating you? You crave some wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe in a spot all your own. Well, head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, streams, you name it. Search by acreage. You can search by location. You can search by the kind of hunting and fishing you're dreaming of. Land.com. It is where the adventure begins. Hey guys, turkey season is in full swing right now, and if you are planning on getting after it, make sure to pick up some Meat Eater Phelps turkey calls to stuff into the old turkey vest or into your fanny pack right now. I carry a few different things. I like to use mouth calls, and I like to use pot calls. Mouth calls or diaphragms, I like them because it gives you hand-free calling, meaning when you're working a bird up close, you can have your gun on your knee, finger on the trigger, ready to roll, and still be making turkey sounds. I like pot calls. I just like pot calls. I enjoy calling with a pot call. Whatever direction you go, including a box call, which I don't personally use too much, but they're fun and great, and I started out with them. Yanni, on the other hand, one of my main turkey hunting buddies, he loves box calls. And what's funny is I'll now and then look to him and give him the look that means get out your box call and find us a turkey. So it's not that I don't like them. I just have Yanni use his. Then I don't have to carry it. Go to Phelps Game Calls. Get calls that are made in the USA and get calls that'll get them close. Find yours at phelpsgamecalls.com today.